Secretary Ricks, thank you for being here this morning. And Julie, if you would please begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Julie McGee with the House Physical, and we're going to start this morning with the Department of Children and Family Services. So DCFS recommended budget for fiscal year 24 is $902.3 million. You'll see the department is primarily funded by state general funds and federal funds. Collectively, they make up $867 million, or 96% of the department's financing. On the right, you can see the budget of each program within the department. Management finance is about 23% of the budget, child welfare 36%, and family support 40%. Here we have the department organization. The department's made up of one agency with 3 divisions: management finance, which is administrative functions, along with licensing and emergency preparedness; child welfare, which contains the child protective services, family services, foster care, and adoption; and then family support division, which is economic stability, child support, disability determinations, and workforce development. You can find more details about the functions of each program at the appendix, which begins on slide 27. Here we're looking at historical spending over the last 10 years by means of financing. The red line at the top is the total spending. The average annual spending change over the last 10 years is an increase of about 1%. At the bottom, if you look at the gray and purple lines, you can see the bump in spending of stat debts and IATs in fiscal year 18. This was due to peak funding for the integrated eligibility IT projects. This slide shows the budget to actual expenditures. Looking back over the last 5 years until fiscal year 19, the unspent authority was approximately 20%. Then in fiscal year 20, the legislature reduced the budget authority to right-size the budget, and it reduced it down to the unspent authority that year at 7.7%. And then for fiscal year 22, the unspent authority was 10%. Up next, we'll look at the department's spending for the prior fiscal year. When comparing the end of the year budget, what was actually spent, DCFS left $81.5 million unspent. 86% of this was federal funds, which you'll find has historically been the driving factor in the unspent authority within the department. This slide breaks that unspent authority into 2 pieces: what was budgeted but not collected, that's the $81.5 million, and then how much was collected but not spent. And you'll see the department traditionally spends everything that's collected. Of the unspent authority, there was $10 million in unspent IAT, and that was from LDH for the Medicaid match for the integrated eligibility project. Then there was $70 million in unspent federal funds. About 44% of that was from TANF, 11% from Title 4B child welfare, and 9% from SNAP. Here we have the existing operating budget as of 12/1 of 22. The only change from what was appropriated was the carry forward adjustments in August that were for bona fide obligations, just weren't completed at the time. Here we have the different sources of funding. Interagency transfers come from LDH for Medicaid, Department of Education for reimbursement of child care payments, and the Child Care Development Block Grant, then GOSEP for emergency preparedness operations. The self-generated revenues are largely made up of child support enforcement services, parental contributions, state central registry fees, marriage licensing fees, and child welfare licensing fees. And then the federal funds is the largest means of financing for the department. And we'll take a deeper dive into that in the next slide. Here's the department's budget is primarily federal funds. Fiscal year 24, it's right at $587 million. Here we're looking at the federal budget as of 12/1 of 22. The state dollars are used as a matching requirement for each type of federal dollars. So we put this together to show you the different sources of funding and what's required to draw down those funds. Overall, you can see of the $572 million of federal funds, that $185 million of state general funds is required to draw down the money. Now let's look at the funding comparison between fiscal year 23 and 24. You see the state general fund is increasing by $22 million. That's primarily from employee pay raises, salary adjustments, a new lease for an emergency shelter in Mansfield, the continuing of the Child First and Intercept Prevention And then the annualization of the child victims of human trafficking, which is a new requirement in fiscal year '22. The increase in fees and self-generated revenues is for additional budget authority to support the increased collections. And then there's 11.7 million decrease in federal funds. This is due to a decrease in TANF funds available, and then an increase is net for the federal funds for the Child First Intercept Preventive Program, and then an increase in SNAP for the EBT cards. Now we're looking at funding programs within the department, and the spending increase within each of those departments, or each of the programs within the department. The average annual change for family support is 6%, for child welfare is 5%, and for management and finance is 6%. Here we can see that the bulk of the expenditures at DCFS are in other charges, interagency transfers, and personnel services. We'll take a closer look at what goes in other charges and interagency transfers in a little bit. This is the 7-year expenditure history, and again, you can see that the majority of the expenses is other charges and personnel services. This slide gives a closer look at the expenditures by category, comparing '24 recommended amount with the current year budget and the prior year actuals. You'll see when comparing the actuals, there's 84 million of the 171 million growth is other charges, and then the interagency transfers are 73.4 million. Significant expenditure changes in fiscal year from fiscal year '23 to '24. Personnel services increased by 22.5 million. Professional services by 4 million. That's due to the increase in the NMAR contract for the EBT, the SNAP. And then other charges increased by 6.7%. Interagency transfers decreased by 22.3 million, and that's due to the reduction of TANF funds. So there's a reduction of what's being transferred to Department of Education for LA4, to Workforce Commission for JAG, and then to LED for the IDEA program. Here we have a breakdown of the other charges and interagency transfer categories that make up about 54% of the department's budget. The majority of the other charges and expenses are the expenses to run the federal programs, and the majority of the IAT is for the OTS for the various IT projects and OTS-based payments. Here we're going to take a deeper look into DCFS IT costs. You can see for fiscal year '24 that they are budgeted at $110.5 million in IT initiatives, $56 million in major IT projects, and $55 million in base services. The integrated eligibility is in the operation and maintenance phase. The CSC modernization project, the RFP will be posted in April this month, and then it's expected that a vendor will be onboarded by September of '23. And then CWIS is the Child Welfare Information System. The state contracted with City Solutions in 2019 for the development of that program, and then the contract was terminated in November of 2022. DCFS is projecting they'll need another $40.2 million to complete the project through fiscal year '26. And the next slide will look further into the pathway to complete that project. So like I said, in June of '19, DCF contracted with City for the development of this program. And then between June and August of '22, DCFS performed a system review and found 8 areas of concern. In November of '22, it was determined that there was not a viable path to move forward, and the contract was terminated. At this point, DCF is exploring 2 options going forward. Path 1 is a request for information to gain understanding of the level of interest, gain an understanding of the business models, the best practices, the roadblocks, barrier to identify potential alternatives. The schedule for this path is to select vendors by September of '23, kick it off by October of '23, and then at that point it'd be an estimated 22 months to production. The second path is RFP. The RFP is being developed concurrently with the RFI, and the event that it's determined that the RFI is not in the state's best interest. The schedule for the RFP is to release the RFP by October of '23, a vendor onboarded by June of '24, and the development would kick off in July of '24, and it's estimated 22 months to production at that point. Here we have discretionary versus non-discretionary expenditures. Of the state's general fund, the $280.4 million, $142.3 million is non-discretionary, and $138.1 million is discretionary. Now we're going to look at the next few slides, an overview of where this department stands personnel-wise. As of January 30th, just over 11% of the department's positions were vacant. However, last week, the vacancies were down to 326, but 117 of those are employees who are detailed into other positions. So the true vacancies as of now is 209. 29 are in management finance, 29 in child welfare, and 151 in family support. And on the right, we have the historical average salary. The average salary for all state workers is in dark green. The average salary for DCFS employees is light green. You can see that the salary for the DCFS employees is historically between $5,000 to $8,000 less than the average salary of state employees. At the bottom, we see the positions compared to salaries, and you can see the rise in salaries for fiscal year '23. This is primarily to the special interest rates and premium pay that was implemented to help retention efforts. DCFS has historically had a lower turnover than the state's average going back to 2018. The blue bar is the state turnover average, the yellow is DCFS turnover. The first box is the top 5 positions with the largest separations. And then the bottom box, I separated out child welfare so you can see the turnover within child welfare for the child welfare trainee and specialist. For the child welfare trainee, the turnover rate was 47% in 2022, and then the specialist 1 is a 42% turnover rate. And then as they move up, the turnover rate decreases. Now we're going to look at program performance and start with child welfare. Here we're comparing the performance from 2016 to 22, and the data behind this is on a federal fiscal year, so the 22 is as of September of the year, and then September 30th of 22. The blue line is the reports of child abuse and neglect. The red line is the CPI investigations, and the bars at the bottom, the gray bar is the families served in their home, the yellow bar is foster care, and the blue bar is children adopted. The numbers dipped in 2022, and that's because of COVID. There weren't as many reports because kids weren't in school, reports of abuse because kids weren't in school or going to the doctors, and then it's been on a steady uptick since then. Now we're going to look at SNAP, and this gives a good representation of what's going on with SNAP right now. The red bars at the bottom is the recipients, and then the blue line is the benefits issued. You can see in March of 2020, the emergency allotment of benefits were issued. Those allotments ended February of '23, so then this data ends February of '23, so in March it's going to take a nosedive down because of the emergency allotment ending. And the emergency allotment is just the benefits that doesn't change eligibility, it's that everybody's still eligible, it's just the benefits are reduced. And then this is cash assistance monthly average benefits. The top is FITAP. The blue is FITAP and the red is kinship care. And in both of them, you can see where the benefits went up in '23, and that's because both of the programs, they increased the monthly benefits in fiscal year '23. Kinship care was doubled and FITAP was increased to meet the national average. And that concludes the presentation. Secretary Ricks and her executive team are here.
Thank you, Julie. Secretary Ricks, you're welcome to make some opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Terry Ricks. I'd like to sort of reintroduce myself to many of you as the secretary, and also like to make sure that you are introduced to the executive team who's here. I'm joined by our undersecretary, who many of you already know, Dr. Eric Horant. We also have 2 new assistant secretaries at the department, Ashley Sias for family support and Amanda Brunson for child welfare. Both of them have been appointed since our last appearance here, so we wanted to make sure that you knew who they were. We also have our general counsel, Kim Glapion-Bertrand, with us, and the emergency preparedness director, Ricky Monte, along with some other staff members who can get deeper on items if you desire. In your packets, we prepared a few things for you. I will not go through a PowerPoint, but the PowerPoint that's in there is meant to be notes for you for those things that are in my remarks this morning. We also provided a SNAP benefit and retail spending figures by house district so that you would be able to understand what the users are like, those our neighbors who are using the benefits of SNAP, and then also our neighbors who own facilities and grocers who accept the EBT card. There also are important fact sheets about the end of the SNAP emergency allotments that Julie just went over. And by the way, you did a really good job, Julie. Thank you. Y'all do know y'all stole her from us, right? I just want to say, I just needed to get that out.
We did, and you can't have her back.
Yes, well, a woman can try. Okay, so you also have important fact sheets about the end of the SNAP emergency allotments and SNAP for students, and also a program called Grow the Good, which we will talk about in a little bit. Lastly, a letter from our federal partners on the child support side that is prompting the one piece of legislation that the agency has caused to be filed with a partner here. So jumping right in, I'd like to address with you the work that we've been doing to stabilize our current workforce, and I appreciate so much that Julie was able to point you to the number that out of approximately 3,600 positions, we now only have 209 vacancies. In certain spaces, I feel like that would be cause for applause, right? Because that's a lot of what we had been out for with the number of people that had been turning over. And so hopefully that will give some indication to you all and to the staff that the support that has been coming from many of you and the public on becoming a part of the solution is working. We wanted to talk to you about the fact that we have hired 345 new full-time equivalents since July. We have been using hiring fairs, working with several of our partners like Louisiana Workforce Commission, Civil Service, Office of Technology Services, the Commissioner's Office, and of course the Governor's Office with lots of support. It does take new employees several months before they're really ready to take on full caseloads. And so though we are so happy to have new personnel, please know that it will be several months before their caseloads are stabilized. The other thing is I did want to spend a little time on the emergency allotments. I do want to make sure, and I appreciate Julie making this point to you all, that the end of emergency allotments is not like the Medicaid rollback. People are not becoming ineligible. It is a reduction in the amount of benefits, taking away the COVID emergency allotments, but the same persons who were eligible are still eligible, right? So it just is about the benefit amount. That was as a result of the Federal Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, and it started in March that the emergency allotments would end. So it will have been 3 years, 36 months that the emergency allotments had been issued, and every household received at least $95 more during that 36-month period. Each household would be different in the amount of extra allotments, emergency allotments that they had received. But one story that I can tell you about is came to me from Senator Henskin's office, where one of Miss Mary, I'll just call her Miss Mary, during the pandemic, she's a one-person household. She was receiving $285 a month, and she's a cancer patient. So when her regular allotment kicked in and the emergency allotment went away, she's now receiving $20 a month. And so you can imagine that someone having relied on that for 3 years, what that really could feel like and look like. It is important for us to remember there are 471,000 households in Louisiana that are receiving this assistance to help them with food insecurity. That equals to 953,000 Louisianians who are receiving that benefit. So we've been doing a lot of communicating directly with those who receive the benefits, our neighbors who are food insecure. But we've also been communicating with your staff members and with as many members as we can to make sure that everyone understands that there may be more hunger in your districts and looking for ways for making sure that people have other resources if they need to. So we've texted recipients, we've sent customized letters to their addresses of record, and we're passing the word out through other community organizations. So you may be getting more calls to your office about this, and I wanted to make sure that I could offer to you just an understanding that someone upset about the changes, that makes sense to me, but we can't really do anything about it, right? It's not a federal, it's a federal benefit, it's not a state benefit. It wasn't a decision that we made, it was a decision that Congress made. And so we are really wanting those who are receiving the benefits to make sure they call us to update their record if they had a change in their household, if they had a change in the amount of expenses that they have had, or a change in the amount of resources that they have coming in. We also wanted to highlight for you that January 2022, we entered into a cooperative endeavor agreement with the Louisiana Association of United Ways for the use of the 211 number. Many of you know about 211. If you pick up the phone anywhere in Louisiana and call 211, you will get a local organization that provides resource and referrals, community organizations, state and federal benefits that are available to that caller. The good thing about that is they really will get a person that will answer the phone. They will talk to them a little bit and find out what their needs are and likely give them more resources than they initially called about. So these federal benefits that have been with us for all this time have been giving us quite a bit of benefit in Louisiana. It's hit our GDP, if you will. It's hit a lot of extra dollars going through our grocery stores, more people that have been employed at the grocery stores because of that. But as we roll that away, we just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of that, how it could impact your areas, but then also know about 211 so that if you have someone calling, you could either direct them to 211 for resources or direct them to contact us if they had a change in their circumstances. We also wanted to bring back to your attention the good work that you have done, and that is we've been telling people, and we hope that you will tell people about Grow the Good. This is a matching program that was created last year through legislation sponsored by Representative McFarland and passed by the legislature. Grow the Good is a program that matches SNAP benefits spent at participating farmers markets, produce stands, roadside stands, and other agricultural partners. So in your packet, the presentation includes a map that shows where the existing programs are, but the program is growing and the potential is there to expand into areas throughout the state, including rural areas and food deserts. So our partners at Grow the Good say that if there is an area without a program or where there should be more programs, we encourage producers and operators to become partners. Shoppers get more produce for their EBT dollar. Farmers get more people buying their good, and our neighbors who are using SNAP benefits will be able to get more nutritious foods. So in addition to funding, Grow the Good offers administrative and technical assistance to help partners through the process. So if you know of anyone in your area that may be interested, we would like to get them connected. Food security is essential to family stability. And what we've been talking about most is about, family stability and how it affects children. Student success is also tied to food security. And so we want to continue to work on all ways to make sure that those who are food insecure have access to benefits, and workforce programs that are through our agency also allow for people to have greater employment and training opportunities. So we're doing that with the help of partners like Board of Regents, Workforce Commission, Civil Service, LCTCS, the Department of Education, Corrections, and Economic Development. So we are a partner in the Board of Regents' goal, or the state's goal, of 65% of the populations to obtain credentials or higher by 2030. That's the way we've been approaching our work. The people that receive benefits and assistance through DCFS are a part of the talent pipeline, and our increase in workforce programs evidences that. So we want to talk to you about, real quick, the investigations, the changes in the in effort and need that's affecting child welfare caseloads. Investigations, based on the number of calls that we're getting right now, are projected to climb 43% higher this fiscal year over last year. If that trend holds, that translates to 7,700 more investigations this year than last year for child protection. As cases increase, there's also an increase in urgency. Whereas last year, 66%, or the 5-year average before this year, was 66% of those calls that we got needed to be investigated within 48 hours. That's risen to 77% so far. We have 531 more children in foster care today than a year ago. We need foster parents. There are 178 fewer foster homes this year than there was last year, while we have 531 more children this year than last year. The climbing number of intakes accepted for investigation has led to an increase in open cases. There were 7,302 investigations open the first week of March, as compared to 4,646 at the start of the fiscal year. The caseload standard for investigations is about 10 new cases per month. In January, I had 110 investigators that had more than 10 investigations, with 21 workers with at least 20, and at least one with 30. The increase in intakes and investigations has led to more families receiving in-home services, up nearly 5%, and more children coming into care. You might wonder how we're tackling this. Over the past several months, our staff has been focused on a set of immediate short-term and actions that are aiming at assessing safety for every child. We're charged to investigate through the centralized intake process. We're tracking our efforts so we can make more meaningfully informed decisions. We're identifying and engaging partners who can support us in the effort, and we're augmenting, deploying, and supporting staff better to help the children and families we served, as I've tried to evidence to you. I can go into detail on some of the other efforts we've been using. For example, what I call a new emergency plan, using personnel from other parts of the agency, borrowing them for like a 3-month period and pulling them into child welfare, those who have some experience in case management or child welfare. We call that a CIS team, a crisis, always go that, crisis critical incident support team. Thank you, team. And then the one other thing I'll go over is the importance of the community, recognizing that children come to our care when there's something going on in the community. When the community is breaking down, we're not taking care of each other some way or another, then those families and children rise to DCFS. So we're expanding an entity, a program that we've been working with many organizations and funded by Casey Family Programs, called My Community Cares. If we can keep families strong and supported in their communities, and it could have a prevention effect, so children are not being abused and neglected, not coming into our care. So we've kicked off last month a statewide expansion of My Community Cares, a community-driven neighborhood approach to strengthening families and preventing child abuse and neglect in Louisiana, gives local communities voice in the development of prevention strategies they believe will work in their communities. It involves partnering with lots of other organizations. We piloted this, in Caddo, East Baton Rouge Parish, Livingston, and Rapides With the data that we received from that, we have moved this to statewide, and it's, moving right now statewide. So this no wrong door approach, this family-centered, this multi-generational approach, we believe is going to be one of the best ways for us to stabilize communities, therefore being able for them to be able to take care of one another, and then addressing the poverty, food insecurity, lack of stable jobs, transportation issues, and childcare, stable and quality childcare in those areas. Keeping children safe and well is our primary concern, but we can't do it alone. We've said uncle, right? We're reaching out. We've got lots of work with our law enforcement and other community providers. So with My Community Cares, we're deepening those partnerships, and you're also gonna see in the coming months a larger campaign on recruiting both foster parents, households, as well as more workers. So we want to make sure that you guys will help us with that. If you know someone who's interested, there are multiple ways that families can assist with the foster care population and/or prevention. We also want to make sure that we're grabbing as many talented people as we can and holding on to them a little bit longer. We will continue to try to get the public to understand that there are some times that you should be supporting families, calling 211, calling the kid line, and then sometimes you should be reporting when there really is abuse and neglect. And we believe that more education in that area would be beneficial to all of us. And so you will find that we'll be doing some work about that going forward. Our partnership with 211 has let us know that calls to the hotline for food has increased triple since the emergency allotments have gone away. And the other thing that's increasing is calls regarding juvenile sex trafficking. Want to make sure that you know that as of January this year, based on an instrument that was passed last year, DCFS started taking all calls related to juvenile sex trafficking. What's the difference? Well, before that, DCFS would only take calls where there was parental culpability. Now, DCFS is taking all calls regarding juvenile sex trafficking. All reports of juvenile sex trafficking are referred to the Louisiana State Police for investigation or for relay to local law enforcement with jurisdiction. But if there is parental or caretaker culpability, DCFS also investigates. Under the Act, DCFS is also making care coordination and advocacy services available to the victims through the partnership with the Governor's Office on Human Trafficking Prevention and the Child Advocacy Centers. In 11 weeks, as of March 19th, we had received 91 juvenile trafficking reports to the hotline. In 11 weeks, we got 91 calls about juveniles being trafficked. 82 of those were for sex trafficking, 9 were concerning labor trafficking. Labor trafficking calls are referred to local law enforcement. From those 91 calls, we have 123 reported victims, juvenile victims. We have opened 44 DCFS investigations where there have been allegations of parental or caretaker culpability alleged. Finally, the last thing that I wanted to make sure to say, let you guys know, we do have one bill that we have asked to be filed. It is regarding our child support program. Recently, we received a letter from the Federal Administration for Children and Families warning us that our TANF grant and our TANF and our Title IV-D federal fund incentives and federal match dollars for child support are at risk if we don't bring our child support law in line with federal law. It would remove a mandatory minimum child support payment. At stake is about $250 million when we look at the TANF grant and the Title IV-D dollars. So the child support is a program that seeks to have parents properly support their children. Our staff is constantly working with our partners in the district attorney's office and with the judges. This does not take away a judge's ability to set the child support wherever it should be in accordance with guidelines. It only removes a mandatory minimum from the statute. And so Representative Carpenter, we're grateful for her, has agreed to bring that bill, and it has been filed. So I want to thank you for hearing out a little bit from most of our programs. There are many other programs in the department we could talk about, but those are the highlights. Representative Zarang, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to make some comments and highlight some things. And myself or the staff ready to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Secretary Ricks. And thank you for taking on this challenge. I know you kind of took over at a time when there are significant issues within the department. Appreciate you doing this. I can't think of another agency with the dichotomy that you face with every day in terms of you deal with the most debased aspects of society, from child abuse to human trafficking to also providing opportunities for hope and other things to help. So appreciate what you do and the challenges associated with that. A couple questions. So you're familiar, have you looked at I'm sure you have, the legislative order report from December of 21?
Absolutely.
And just wanted to touch on a few of those things to get your input as to how those are being addressed. One was the state laws intended to protect victims, such as issuance of protective orders, are not consistently implemented across the state. I don't know if you can address that to a great degree. Some of that lies not within your control, but from that perspective and from the finding of the auditor, how is that being addressed?
So thank you for the question, and I don't have that finding right in front of me now. I can tell you that protective orders, like many orders across the state, depending on which court you're in, is a little bit different. So one of the things that is difficult in our program area is that most of our programs are connected to courts and judges and orders. So it is a little bit difficult to kind of keep up with each region and how they're doing it in that courtroom. I'm going to ask the staff to take a look at the specific finding that you're looking at to provide me a refresher on what we talked about. We have instituted a manner where whatever I said or whatever was said we were going to do is what we're mandating that we get done. And so our follow-up and follow-through, though I don't have it in front of me, I want to be able to answer you more specifically.
I appreciate that, and if you can, we can get with staff on that later. Another, which is out of your control too, but also is important to your ability to conduct relief and help that you have, is speaking of judges, where it says the state law requires enforcement training on domestic violence, and other entities involved in addressing domestic violence are not required. For example, there's no requirement for judges and district attorneys to receive domestic violence training. Again, that's not in your control, but it affects what you do. And you mentioned your working relationship with judges and district attorneys. Has that improved, or is there things that you think we can or should do to improve that working relationship?
Thank you, Chairman. So there are multiple things that we do to strengthen relationships with the DAs and the judges, including, we have actually what I would call contract staff in the DA's office for our child support enforcement programs. So the the training that we go through, many of them go through. And so I was just at a conference speaking at the LSCEA conference, I never know what these acronyms stand for, that included the DAs, some judges, and the staff, so that we can train together. In addition to that, on the child support side, that was the child support side. On the child welfare side, there's a conference that we train together at as well, called Together We Can. But every other month, we meet with the Judges Association, Juvenile Judges Association, to talk through various things. I think that there are multiple opportunities throughout all the state government and all of government to understand what's happening with domestic violence a little bit more. So protective orders is important to justice. And I think that we're in a climbing space right now in Louisiana, but there's many ways that we can do better. DCFS, I'm not so sure that we are the right place for all training to go through for those who are in, justice involved, or should be, but we certainly want to be a part of the solution for it. We have to train our staff to be looking for that, both on the child welfare side as well as the child support side. And so we do have some training for our staff. But relationships are ongoing and ever changing as people move different roles. So, most of the time when we have meetings with the judges, you will see my entire executive staff there benched down. So we really prioritize the relationships with the courts. We go to the training that the Supreme Court offers to the judges also to provide insight in that space. I'm very open, however, if you have some ideas as some other ways for us to connect and grow those relationships and increase training opportunities. So if you have those, I certainly would love to get them.
Well, we do, and we've had some discussions with both the DAs and the judges, and I think they have challenges within their entities as well as to how this all can work together. But I guess ultimately we need to break down the barriers and make sure we focus on what's important, and that is the people y'all are trying to serve. So
Thank
yes,
you.
we can work on some things that I think all judges and district attorneys, in addition to your office, can work on.
Absolutely, thank you.
A couple that are within your control. The lack of domestic violence shelter beds and support services to meet the needs of all victims is an ongoing challenge. How much do you have in the budget this year for that? And obviously, if you could use more, what would you suggest would be needed?
Representative Zarang, I'll ask Eric, our Dr. Horant, to come to the table, the undersecretary, to answer that question, because I don't know it right off the top of my head. But I will say this to you, that what I can say is in your control. If you gave us more money, I bet every dollar that came to that program would be spent. I've had personal time in some of the shelters to understand that they get the very basics when they're in the shelter, not necessarily complete services to actually allow someone to transition. And in those shelters, about only 40 days of support at the shelter until they've got to figure out another place to go. I'm very concerned with the lack of affordable housing in Louisiana for people to be able to transition, moving from completely from one area to get away from someone that is an abuser and moving someplace else. I've seen this with my own eyes through my work with my church and through family members. It's a very difficult process, and if there were more money to provide more services to people, it would be used. People are cobbling together services right now without necessarily having complete services for the situation and the trauma that they've been in. Of course, we know that there are some of the providers won't allow a family with boys that are teenage to come with the mother. So you don't have enough family beds, for example. And so this process of serving those who are victims certainly could use more resources. And so I'm happy to have a lot of conversations about bringing more resources into that area. And I'd like Dr. Horan to answer your question about how much is in the current budget.
Wait, hang on. Okay, sir.
Eric Horant, Undersecretary at DCFS. We have $7 million right now in the budget. It's a little bit more than we used to have in the past. We increased by $1 million, $1.5 million 2 years ago.
Okay, so again, you indicate, yes, the funding is within the control of the committee, but I wanted to make sure, are you asking for, within the budget, the executive budget, what you need? Have you asked or tried to ask, and was it not put in there?
It was not a budget request, no.
Y'all didn't put in a budget request?
We did not make a budget request for more
Additional
dollars there.
Okay.
Yeah,
But you can definitely use it, but
right. So we
you recognize the
disperse it.
problem and needs
Yes,
more money.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, this goes hand in hand, right, with all the increases that we're seeing in child welfare. This is an indicator of what is happening in the community. So if violence is rising and violence against children is rising, then violence against spouses and others is rising. And so absolutely, it is something that could, even before the pandemic, and those things that are happening now, we could have used more money in that program.
Okay. One other thing in regard to the report, it said the intervention programs for perpetrators which aim to protect victims and prevent future abuse have no oversight or consistency across the state. How has your agency addressed that or plan to address it?
So we don't have that as one of our goals in our agency. So we're a space where we connect with a lot of different resources. Certain resources, for example, if the courts are wanting to put a perpetrator into a program, the court can have that program, right? So there are multiple spaces where services are allowable, and I think that it's true that there's not one agency who sees itself as the point agency for that. I think you'll find increasing interest, but it's another space where we as the state have to determine where do we want the point to be, right? The rest, we're all coming together and collaborating. Some of us are dealing with the victims, usually that would be us. Some of us are dealing with the perpetrators, and usually that's the courts. In our child support area, we have multiple things that we do to help both parents in a household, those who are the custodial parent and those who are the non-custodial parent, to bring about resources, a new office to allow employment and training and those kinds of things. But victim services, they're basically tapped here on the domestic violence side unless those children are coming in to care for us. So I think that what you're talking about is great prevention services, but we don't have that as one of our major programs.
Well, obviously, we should work on it, but do you think the Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System could help with that?
So yes, the CWIS system can help with a lot of things, but being able to actually look at what happened in a household, what was the root cause, and did everybody get resources to get better? We won't be able to count many of those things right now because of the way the systems are. Now we know a lot more about what would prevent child welfare and what helps people who are hurting to get better. And yes, we would be able to provide better services through better insights into what's going on with families with a system that was more sophisticated.
Okay, so the CWIS system would definitely help.
Yes,
It's
sir.
okay, which is a great segue into what's really frosting me right now. So I don't know if you can speak to this, but if someone in your entity could speak to it, and also someone from OTS could come and talk to me about this.
Absolutely.
Okay?
And so I think OTS is here to talk about the CWIS system, and I was taking a little bit that, these are OTS contracts that we've been working with them on, and it is for our services. So we are very interested and we're very collaborative in our work. But, when it comes to the actual technical stuff.
Okay, well, and before we go there, I just want to put it in perspective. So correct me if I'm wrong. So this started in 2019, right?
Correct.
We've invested $40 million into this system, and as of today, we don't have anything to show for it. And the prognosis is we've wasted, well, I guess that's subjective. And I don't want to use, the money is not getting us where we need to be. And we've essentially started a program that we're going to have to scrap and start over again. And you're asking in your budget for another $40 million to accomplish a goal that should have been accomplished, that started in 2019, that is projected to take another 2 years once you get the proposals, which won't be to the end of this year, to complete, of a critical system that you just said is very important to the operation of your agency. How did it get there? Why did it get there? And what's the problem on how this happened?
Thank you, Representative Zarang. And I'll let Matt jump in here, but I'd say that you summed it up pretty well. One thing that I would say before Matt gets going is that 100% is not lost. There are many things that we have been able to learn and code so that when we get back started, we're not starting from zero. So I think that's important. The other part of it is that a large part of the transition is about cleaning the data from legacy systems. That work has been ongoing. It was important to do. It's still continuing, but relatively, you've spoken it pretty well. So let's take it on.
Right. So good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm Matthew Vince from the Office of Technology Services. So the Secretary is correct. There are a few, well, there's actually quite a bit that we'll be able to reuse moving forward. And so just to set the stage of how one of these projects work, it's obviously there's the system itself that we're working on. There's all the legacy data that we have to clean up, which the Secretary referenced, and what we call organizational change, which is the process of getting the technology and business in alignment. And in some cases, that may mean modifying a business process to meet a technology need or vice versa. And one of the big things here is CWIS is a significant different program operation than previous in the previous kind of SACWIS world. So some of the things we have that we can reuse, significant effort on data cleanup. As you can imagine, I believe the current system is in the 30-year-old time frame, so there's lots of legacy data there that had to be cleaned and scrubbed and improved. That work will be continued to use. We have a significant amount of CWIS-related requirements. When the first project went in, CWIS was a brand new program essentially to the United States. We were one of the first states to embark on a CWIS modernization. And so what we've learned about the CWIS program and business requirements, we have all that to reuse. We have all of the interfaces with all of our third parties, all of any other entities that we trade data with. All those have been defined, and all the reporting we have for CWIS compliance, that's in there. All of our enterprise integration and workflows. So we have a lot of requirements, we have a lot of data cleanup, we have a lot of business process analysis and work there to help us with this new project.
I fully appreciate that, but I think that is the best example of political bovine parabola that has been given to this committee in a long time. So essentially, you're saying you paid $40 million to clean your data.
There's, well, more than just cleaning the data, and I can only speak from the technology side. I know there's been a lot of work on the program side too, so I don't want to overstep. But on the technology side, there was, I don't know how many systems, I think 5 or 6 major systems that comprise. There's a lot of work there.
We don't need to get into the weeds, apart from the fact that how did we get here? Because we paid a company a substantial amount of money that invested in proprietary stuff that we couldn't have owned anyway. So that's all gone. Who decided that, who raised the red flags? Why were the red flags waved? And what are we doing to recoup some of that money? So this company is going to take the money, it's proprietary stuff that we paid for that we don't get any benefit from. They're going to go away. And are you doing anything to try to recoup some of that money?
So on the contract side, we collectively decided to terminate this contract for convenience.
Convenience. How convenient? What was convenient about it that we wasted $40 million?
So, there were, and let me go back a little bit because I want to talk about some of the reasons why, because you brought that up.
I'd love to hear.
So there was an assessment done starting around April, May, June of last year to look at the system. There were some concerns raised about some of the technology and how this is being developed. And so CWIS is modular, which means there are many different pieces of software that have to all come together at the end to work successfully. And so when you look at each module in isolation, things about how they will work together are not necessarily apparent. So we took the time to do an analysis, and there were areas of concern that we found on technology and program side, which we sent to the company. A lot of it was around visibility for workers. So if an entry got made into the system, how do we escalate that to a caseworker? How do we escalate that to their supervisor? How do we get notifications throughout? That was one of them.
I'm sorry, so you determined that when?
So we sent this report to the company in June of last year.
Of last year.
Right. And so there were several areas. I think there were 7 total spanning, testing and security, some of the notifications we talked about. And so what we found is that we didn't believe collectively the system was going to be successfully implemented. And that was at a kind of from a core technology perspective. And so moving forward with that system did not appear to be the right choice at the time. We were worried that implementing a system would have caused more issues than we were solving. And so the decision was made between us and the department to terminate that contract and move forward. That was after speaking with the federal partners, getting their buy-in, understanding what other states are experiencing, and what options we had to move forward.
Okay, so the contract was signed in 2019, and it was last year of 22, so 19, 21. Close to 4 years into this, you discover there's a problem and that we need to completely redo this?
Representative Zering, I will say this to you, Mr. Chairman, that there were multiple checkpoints of re-engineering, restarting, adding resources, trying to make it work, looking at, is it us, is it you, is it me, and then finally getting to the point of adding more. I think at some point there were more vendors or more resources brought to bear to see if we could sort of salvage. And then after working on that, it was determined the best thing for us to do to get out. Now, and I appreciate that Matt said that we worked together. Now, I wasn't in this seat then, but I do know that our federal partners came to the table. And it might also be informative that there is yet a state that has a CWIS system approved by the feds. There are components that have been approved, but none. And so in the middle of the project, the federal government sent new requirements down. Now they're looking for a CWIS system and there was a change there. So I do think that and I think it was about a year and a half in, had those requirements come earlier, perhaps the state would have made a different decision on the vendor. I do think, it would be right to say that the vendor had us believing they had a little bit more in their box than they did. And yet we tried to work through that. But again, I don't think that we might have been in the same space if the federal requirements and the guidance had come out a year and a half earlier than it did. Now, that doesn't take away the 40 million. It doesn't take away the anger that we both feel.
Yeah, well, there's still a lot of anger that we need to deal with.
Yep.
But the whole point is, again, ultimately, OTS made the decision to choose this consultant, correct? So, again, this is the problem. We rely on you guys to do this on behalf of the agencies. Sure, the next thing is we're going to have an OTS in each agency, which is somewhat cost prohibitive, but the point of, we rely on you guys to do this. Part of the problem, as I appreciate it from some, is that if we would allow for more competition in the proposals, I think that would definitely help. The process, again, and unfortunately, Representative Desatel had to attend a funeral. He wasn't here today because I'm sure he'd chime in. But the challenge is again, it goes into the OTS black box. We don't hear about it, or the agencies don't hear about it until either you make a decision, and then our assumption is you're looking out for our best interest, and assuming that you are, not saying you don't, and again, I don't want to besmirch OTS. Y'all do a great job. But on this one, somebody dropped the ball, and it took 6 years to recognize it, and that's a problem. And I think we need to do a better job in terms of how we're making these proposals more competitive, allowing more people to come in. I think the problem is we're relying on consistently larger vendors, because I don't know if it makes it easier for OTS or you're comfortable with them, but I think if we could be more competitive in how we address these proposals, might help the situation. But also we have some issues, so much so that Representative Desatel has established a task force to look into some of the issues of OTS that affect agencies across the state, that we need to do a better job in communicating with your offices and the agencies you represent to ensure that things like this don't happen. I don't want to lay all the blame at you, but somebody or something really dropped the ball in this case, and it's costing the state not only money, but more importantly, a system that's critical to what you do to helping families is going to be delayed at least another 2 to 4 years. Are we doing anything to try to get back at the money that this company used or took?
Not at this point because of the cancellation for convenience. So, and of that 40 million, I did just want to provide a little bit of background. There was 13 million paid to the vendor in that. So that, I think that was their responsibility in this of I think a maximum contract of approximately 23. So roughly a little around half of what we had anticipated spending with that company. And so because of the termination for convenience, in order to move this project forward in the next phase, there's no process there for us to go back and try to get them. And they did, according to our analysis and some review by the agency. This is a deliverables-based contract, and so they did perform work. We have those deliverables, and so.
Of which you can't use because they're proprietary, right?
No, so the system itself is, but a lot of the deliverables they created are not.
Well, if you can't use
proprietary.
the system, having the deliverables don't mean anything.
Well, yeah, and so some of those they're not related to the system itself. They are programmatic things. So they are analysis of the process of the business, how that works, how that aligns to workflows. The system is how those workflows are implemented, but the work to understand how the program operates and the technology decisions around all the things around the system are there, and they're in those deliverables. And so, yeah, it was $13 million to that vendor for.
Yeah, total
So-
program cost definitely has a lot more consisting in that total, including, paying for employees that were working on the project, other vendors like Postway Nettleville who did QA/QC.
Correct.
Yeah.
And other things. So I appreciate that you teased that out a little bit.
There's been a lot of teasing, unfortunately. So, again, I don't want to belabor this. This is a problem. Hopefully, the next proposal process will be better, more competitive, and hopefully we can work toward getting the system. We'll move on. We have other questions. But again, I appreciate y'all coming today.
Thank you.
And before I go on, I know we have a bunch of questions. While we're on here, we have the folks from OTS at the table. Does someone have a question specific to this? I'll let y'all go first while they're here. If not, we'll move on. Okay, Representative Bacala.
And you kind of mentioned a little bit of this, and it's mostly covered, but how much did we pay so far? Is it 40 million? Is that how much has been expended?
For the project as a whole, yes.
So we have spent 40 million. Of the 40 million, how much of that is actually usable? I mean, do we have 10 million worth of usable deliverables that can actually have value? I'm trying to get, because you said it's not all lost. How much is lost?
I don't know how to quantify that. We have quite a bit, but I don't know how to quantify that against time because the majority of the 40 million is just the time it took to get us here. Of the 13 million in the contract, we have those deliverables. We also have copies of the system in which we can use to extract all the information out of. So there is quite a bit. I can't put a number to that.
Have you sought a new contract?
We're in the process of doing that, and I can go over where we are if that would help.
Well, and I'm trying to get a value I'm trying to figure out if we lost 40 million or 20 million. And so I guess in the new contract, you're indicating that you have certain component pieces that are already complete?
We have a lot of the requirements for those. So from a technology perspective, the core system that we were going to get from CITI is not usable. A lot of the ancillary pieces are from conversion that will not have to happen again, and some of the legacy work won't have to be repeated. But in whichever approach we use in the future, the core CWIS functionality will have to be procured.
Why didn't we discontinue the contract for cost rather than convenience?
So, and that was a collective decision, and
I want to know why, who collectively
so
decided it?
the answer was in order to move forward as quickly as possible with the next phase to get a system in place.
Well, it seems to me that you should have said, we're canceling this contract for cause because you haven't delivered a system that, and I'm sure on top of the deliverables, the individual pieces, there had to be a time frame associated with delivering the completed project, correct?
There was an estimated time frame, but nothing specifically in the contract for that.
Why not?
Because these systems are complex and there's no way for us to know upfront how long it's going to really take. It's different from building a building or a bridge. The requirements are very
Well,
complicated.
let me tell you, that you're not the first contract to come here. I remember probably one that was much more complicated than this, and it was Deloitte, and it was the LDH system, and it was very, very expensive, much more so than this. But having read those contracts, the specific deliverables, what was delivered, what wasn't, the timeframes by which it was to be delivered, when it was incomplete, they were required to finish it. Actually, it kind of overlapped because we added new components to it, but there was a finish date. Now, they didn't finish by finish date, but they finished within the second period, if I recall correctly.
Representative Baker, I was the executive sponsor when we did it for Light. We had delays with Light also, and the issue is not as much necessarily the vendor as us providing resources. So when you have delays, it becomes sort of an issue of how do you mitigate the issue. The vendor can bring, some vendors can bring more resources. We may not be able to do it. So it ends up being sort of this blaming game, of why are we delayed, how are we going to do it? So we don't really like this firm date, that would be nice, but it doesn't really work like that because the vendor may bring resources, we may not have the resources for that. So we just try to work together with the vendors to get as close as possible to that timeline.
Well, look, we're talking about a significant amount of money that was wasted. And we're talking about a determination by you guys to not even go down a path where we might recover some of the lost funds, which would have been for cause, not for convenience, I'm assuming. That's what you're telling me. So we've given up our ability to even recover funds, right?
As I understand it, yes.
And who made that decision?
It was a joint decision between our OTS, division, DCFS together.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. Okay, Representative Villio, I think, has a question on the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What level of participation did we have by the users along with the vendor in the development of the system?
So it started at the RFP, actually. We had, I think, 3 of the 5 members of the committee were DCFS employees. We include the agency across the entire process. So I don't have a number of the amount of resources from DCFS, but there were program staff represented from all the areas of child welfare throughout the process. I think we included field staff, we included program managers, the full gamut of folks that would know the requirements and understand how the system should be developed.
And in, I guess, deciding that things weren't working with this vendor, was there any determination that part of the issue has to do with the users, their ability to use the system?
If I understand your question, there was concern that what software would be in the hands of that caseworker, for example, would not be an effective tool for them to do their job.
Sure.
And that was some of the primary, there are technical reasons why we felt that, but there were program reasons as well to discuss with the team.
And that's why I get back to what level of participation there was in the development by the users. Because if you're telling me you had 3 members, 3 of 5 committee members, that's just not enough. And I think you're shaking your head,
Well,
you know that, because if it's not created in a way that the user, and how many users do we have of the system in DCFS?
Approximately 1,000.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, so if it's not created in a way that those 1,000 individuals can effectively use it and enter the necessary information, then it's never going to work.
It is created with end user. The team members, coming from DCFS, that's around half of the team, are coming mostly from the field. And then when we do modules, we test them we had 60 or 65, I remember, change champion, we call them, that were giving feedback to the project. So it is created with input and feedback from the field staff.
But are the team members the ones who are deciding, or are they actually using a large number? I know you just said 60, but are they testing it with a large number of individuals, workers, and are they getting information from those workers? Or are they just designing it based upon the way they think it should work and look?
It's a multiple step process.
It is, and I think even in the beginning, maybe some of the process and the difference, I think, for the way that now the federal government is expecting project builds like this, like the light system or the eligibility system was what they call a waterfall project. These are what we want you to do, and you do it. And then now, this one's called a
Agile project.
Agile project. And, but we started with a cot, like something off the shelf. And then when the staff looked at it, they're like, we need all these other things. So I think in the beginning, part of it was this mind shift change to moving to agile processes from what we are considered to be a waterfall project, where, you know, you're looking to change something. You know, they're building something. And so, again, I think I go back to maybe there wasn't everything in the box that we thought was in the box. And when the staff came to it and said, we need all these other things, they started augmenting the box even further. I think that's being honest with you about the beginnings of the project. But I will say that we were working together to talk about, to get through all those things. But at some point, we realized this is really just not going to work. So I will say that the federal government, who works with us as an equal partner because they provide as much funding as the state does, they sat with us and literally applauded us for canceling the project, even with the federal dollars lost, because they too could tell that we weren't going to get we weren't going to get to where we needed to get to. And like I said, they had also issued new requirements and not regulations, but guidelines after we started the project. And so, but they approved the project the way that it is. And I think that maybe even through some of the experiences of several of the states going through this, they came up with these guidelines. Sort of like based on what didn't happen. I will say that in the grand scheme of things, and this doesn't make it any better, however, the truth is that the other states that failed went through a project fully that were not able to get it approved by the feds, spent hundreds of millions of dollars on contractors, not $11 million in a contract. And so in the grand scheme of things, and this doesn't make it any better, it's just a piece of information, is a drop in the bucket compared to larger projects that were built that didn't work in the end. And so I think that's why the federal government sort of applauded and worked with us to say, yeah, let's cut and let's keep going. A lot of things on the table. I would say we definitely have, DCFS has definitely had input with OTS. We need them. They provide, they're the head. They definitely allow us to provide lots of input and insights. In the end, I think for me, the thing that I appreciate about it is that we're not stuck, not able to move forward. I think that's the when I look at the whole thing, I look at at least we're able to move forward. I feel like if we were stuck in the fight, in the legal fight, we wouldn't be able to be forward. So that's the only thing that I could see is like a benefit to that, the way that we went forward.
And that was going to be my point in terms of moving forward. Do any of the guidelines address the need to include more user participation to develop a successful system? I've been there. I've been in Jefferson Parish when we developed systems. And we learned the hard way. Way back when, where you have the vendor and who is not going to necessarily tell you that you need all of these individuals in the room. Why? Because they're going to create a system that then doesn't work
Right.
or that needs to be modified once you get the users involved. So we know that now.
Yes, and that's, I think, why the federal government changed from the waterfall way to the agile way,
Sure.
where, you know, they require. And so
Okay.
actually was in the kickoff meeting when the federal government came and required us all to take training on what agile is and why those things that you're outlining
Okay.
are important for the project.
So going forward, we believe we have that in place.
Yes, and of course, one of the benefits I would say, and it doesn't take away all the things that we're all mad about, but what did occur is that we're all way more mature and way more trained in agile, what the expectations are, et cetera. And then even in the department, we have now project managers who've been trained properly and, you know, some other things like that. So, you know, we can't get the money back, but certainly not all is lost. And a lot of people in the agency have gained a lot more sophistication in this area. And I do believe that we're not starting from scratch
But
when
the
we go forward.
manager's viewpoint is so different from the caseworkers.
You are correct.
And that's why you need
That's right.
that level of involvement to make it work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Villio. Representative Edmonds for a question. Wait,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think we were expecting to be this long, but we can't stop now. So I'm looking at page 20, and on this $40 million loss, basically, I see 4 bullet point lines is all I see in reference to a $40 million loss. I think that is overwhelmingly insignificant, to say the least, if we're going to, let me ask this question. Let me just, start from scratch here. Who appropriated this money? Who appropriated the $40 million to be spent?
You did.
This body,
Yes, sir.
in what year?
Starting in 2019.
Because so many of the people in this room appropriated $40 million, and we've got 4 bullet points to tell us of why we lost the $40 million.
Thank you, sir. It's a good point, and I think this one is sort of outlining where we can go, how we go forward, but,
And
you know,
I want to
my
get there.
friends at
I want to get
LTS
there. Sure, I
might
want to
have
get, I
more.
have some questions about
Okay.
that. But if we're going to stay going backwards, because how in the world would we have confidence of approving another budget with 4 bullet points of how we lost $40 million? How would we do that today? I
And
think that's a reasonable
We can provide a
question.
lot more. There is a lot more, and the Secretary's right. This is a forward-looking slide on slide 20. We have a list of all the things that we believe we can reuse as we move forward, the plan to move forward, and how we expect to
Right, so
use the staff. And
did this body that appropriated $40 million, did we hire this vendor?
No, sir.
Okay, so who is the vendor?
CITI, Creative
And where are
Information.
they from?
They're from Virginia, I believe.
And do they work with other states, or what kind of background did we do with these people?
Right. So I have some history on that procurement, and they were one of 11. We received 11 bids. They were one of 11. They did not have the highest technical score. They were somewhere towards the middle of that, but they had the lowest cost score. And so that's what kind of sent them up to the top. They had experience with federal government. They had done some work with, they're around the DC area, so they'd done some work with feds. Not a lot of state experience, but local experience with child welfare.
Had they done one of these reports for another state?
No one at the time had done a CWIS system. There were no vendors, no states.
And during this same amount of time period, has somebody else done one of these reports?
So I don't know
Another state?
the answer to that specifically. What I've heard is there are a handful of states in the process of doing it, and maybe one that has actually successfully implemented a system to date.
I don't think we have one yet.
Yeah, so I mean, and they're in
Components,
various
though.
states. Correct,
Components,
that's what
yeah.
components. So there's no state in a fully compliant CWIS system to date.
What kind of report can we get before we approve this and move forward? What kind of report, significant report, can we get of how this occurred and why this is not going to happen again. I do not think that's unreasonable. I think it ought to be required from this committee that we get that kind of information, not only for the people in this room, but for all the colleagues that are going to ask us these questions. It is our task to make certain that we get. So what kind of report can you put in our hands so that we can go back through this and the chairman can lead us of whether we are, again, you're asking us to approve another significant piece of money. So what kind of report and when can we have it?
Well, I think we can get a report to answer all your questions, and we can do that as soon as possible. We have a lot of the information already, so, I mean, do you have a week or so? Is that okay?
1 week?
1 week, will that work?
While we're still in hearings, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request that a report come back. And I'd also like and listen, I'm not going to make an motion, but I'm to publicly, if we don't get the report, I would say we do not move forward with any other funding because I think this ought to be required. I think it's reasonable for us to do this. Now, in the second part, since we wanted to move on page 20, I see things that are in here that bother me. In the procurement option number 1, you have challenges, but yet in there it says potentially procuring out-of-date technology. So even this possibility doesn't seem like it doesn't help me build a lot of confidence in that either.
So, right, okay. So when we do a request for information, we're asking the vendor community, what options do you currently have to help solve this problem? We have done this, we have gotten the responses back. Those responses range from, we can build you something from scratch, all the way to we have something fully developed and ready to go. Also in that is what we call a transfer system. And so that is one where a vendor has implemented a module in another state, and due to interagency and interfederal transfers, we can obtain that technology for free and then pay for implementation. So we kind of get the software for free because another state's already paid. The challenge with that option is while it does seemingly accelerate your timeline, that software is already in place, so it may be old. And so we have to do an analysis to see when was it built, how long has it been in place. So that's just one of the options. Other options include, brand new software that is currently in development. And so that's part of what the RFI is to understand what does that
You're
menu look
paralleling
like.
of which one of these directions that we're going to recommend, and this is going to be months more. I mean, you'd be lucky to get any of this by the end of I know I see some months in here, but that would be if you were able to keep your timeline, which is very difficult. We know doesn't happen often. By the end of the year of deciding either from option A or B. Am I reading that correctly?
Right, because we want to make sure we do this analysis properly.
Right.
There are, with each of these, we have to understand the compliance aspect from the federal government, what they want to help us fund, which approach they're going to approve, which one may be the most viable for us, depending on the particular solution we're looking at. So we're trying to keep all of these avenues open, depending on what the community has to offer. And I think I mentioned earlier, when we first did this contract, there were no legitimate systems in place that someone had put in another state for CWIS. So today, now at least we have states that are on their way. So there is technology being developed. And so part of this request for information process is to learn what does that look like, how much does it cost, what is the delivery, how do they build it, and how long would it take us to implement it here in Louisiana.
I mean, so you're showing September and October in the procurement option number 1, and then you're showing October, same year, 23, in option number 2. So I'm assuming you're trying to gather and then parallel the information and then make a decision based on both reports.
Correct.
Is that reasonably what we think the plan is?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative Edmonds. Okay, let's see. We have Representative Wheat for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't think I'm going to be long here. I'm just trying to get the timeline on when decisions were made and what information was shared back and forth. And so I think in earlier testimony, if I'm correctly restating that the decision was made somewhere in June for a cancellation.
The decision was made in October. The analysis was done in June. So our assessment of the system, its posture, and that report was submitted to the vendor for response After that was returned and analyzed, that's at the point the decision was made in October to issue the letter of termination.
And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like I remember conversations on JLCB in November, that testimony was made that there was still going to be the likelihood of it becoming up and running in 4 months. Can you refresh my memory on that? Was there such testimony at that time?
I'm not familiar with November JLCB. We were at JLCB earlier in the year in June, and that was due to timing. The contract was expiring, and at that point, we were in the process of doing our analysis, and so we weren't anticipating at that point to be canceling the contract. And so we needed to extend the contract to keep going. After that, of course, after that review was completed, we made the decision to end. So the original contract ended in June of '22. And so we needed to get that process moving to get the approval.
I certainly think we need to look back and see if there was any reservations that should have been brought to GLCB at that time so that we could act upon it earlier and maybe have more options at our disposal if we felt like we needed to get out at a sooner time and it wasn't shared. I would be concerned about that. So let's review that timeline process and maybe give us a report back exactly when the decision was made, how JLCP had what role they should have played on what decision they either had or didn't have. And I'd like that information. And look, I would just tell you, moving forward, I think is important here. Vendors are a little bit nervous about a competitive process on how bids are going to go and what that process looks like. I'm not going to ask you to repeat a lot of what you already said here. I'll just make that statement that I think it's important that whatever process we set up now, there is a competitive nature to it, and we get it right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Representative Wheat. I have to go to Representative Marcel next, or she's going to be very upset.
Thank you, Secretary Ricks, for taking on this heavy lifting, because that's exactly what it is. You know, we've been talking for quite some time about the CWIS, and I know a lot of the audience or the people who are watching is wondering what is CWIS, is Comprehensive Child Welfare Informational System. And my question is there a mandate from the federal government that we get this system up and running? And if so, what's the timeline on it? And when were we given that?
Yeah, so there is an expectation that
There's
our
an
child welfare
expectation.
information systems are going to be in line with the federal requirements. I think it's important to understand that there's not a state that has a fully functional and approved child welfare information system.
But my question is there a deadline that the federal government has given all of the states
No, ma'am.
There
Like,
is no
so
di-
if
okay.
there is one, it's not functional, if that makes sense. Because like, there are some expectations that the federal government have, but then they don't, like, no one's following it. In other words, no one's been able to gather their approval, and so it ends up being perfunctory, if you will. Where we find their expectations and timelines are in the approval of a specific project, like this one. In the same way we come and talk with you guys, we have to go and talk to them for them to approve the federal dollars for a project. Then they're all in with us. They will approve not only the funding, but also the project timeline. And so they are walking with us. And if we are not on time, we have to talk to them we have to give them reports, APDs, different types of reports in their system to ensure that we're accountable to them for the federal dollars as we are accountable to you all for the state general funds.
So I think I heard you say the vendors, how many people put in to be the
11
vendor?
originally.
It was 11.
11. One of them was disqualified, but there were 11 total.
One of them was disqualified. Okay, so we chose this vendor because they were the lowest bidder. Is that right? Is that
was-
accurate?
So that was
And
one
so
of
the
the
lowest
primary.
bidder is not always the best option if they don't have the technology experience that they should have.
They weren't the lowest technical score. They were somewhere in the middle of the pack, but they did have the lowest cost given them the advantage.
So have we learned anything from this process? And are we, do we have things in place, benchmarks for the next vendor? Because what I'm hearing is, I mean, it's quite disturbing for me that you say we cancel the contract for convenience. I wouldn't use the word convenience because it's inconvenience for us to throw away $40 million. Now, you might want to try another word, not convenience, because it's inconvenience. And I think we should have had some type of benchmarks in place where we could have gotten out of the contract and made perhaps, I think you've heard us say over and over again, every speaker almost, how can we get some of our money back? I've never seen a contract when a person does not provide what you're asking for, and you just cancel the contract and you just whoops do, okay, we'll just start over. And I did hear you say that some of the things in this contract that we did get, we can use, but nobody can quantify that, right? Is that accurate?
So there are lists that they will be able to provide, and you can quantify it in the sense of like counting them up, but I think it's not going to satisfy what's, at the core of your questions, concerns, and comments, right? And so I can't disagree with you about any of that. I will say to you that we certainly have learned lessons, and I think that the federal government has too, which is why the guidelines that they issued after we're already in the project, I think will be helpful. I'm hoping that as we go forward, one of the things that we will be able to bring to bear is those agencies, the state agency, other state agencies who have CWIS components that have been approved, we now have some real things to pull from, right? So if that component is approved in one area and another, we now see what could work. We now see vendors that have shown some success. Maybe this RFP will look a little differently now.
You also said that there were others who lost much more money than
Yes,
us,
ma'am.
so hundreds of millions. So that, even though they went first, doesn't necessarily mean we want to cap it them, because
That's right.
right?
Yes, ma'am. And this is where, when we'll go to conferences and spend time working with other state agencies to really understand like what works, what doesn't work. Sometimes it's a technology, sometimes it's relationships. Sometimes a vendor will bring someone on to your project, but then they don't stay on the project. And so, you have some brain drain.
I know we provided the money from this committee, but who was ultimately responsible for making the decision to go with that company? Who can we hold accountable? I heard him say it was collective. Collective with whom?
So it's an OTS contract, right?
So
we work
OTS is
together,
responsible, right?
right?
Is that what you want to say? Is that the elephant in the room?
Well,
So,
I'm just looking for the elephant.
right, and these are collective. So OTS has a role here because it is technology, but the funding comes from the federal side. The funding comes from the agency approved through here. And so when the committee, the review committee, the RFP, when they make a decision about this is who the committee has decided is the awardee, that decision was reviewed with executive management and DCFS for concurrence, and we move forward with that concurrence. So it is collaborative. We can't do this without them, and I think that's vice versa for them as well. And so, I don't think it's necessarily a single, where you can kind of point to a single person.
So you
we
think
went in this
multiple
together.
people should be fired for this failure? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think.
You don't have to answer that. I was just wondering because you kept circling around. And I'll move on to my other questions very quickly. You said it was 91 reports on sex trafficking in 11 weeks?
yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, we started answering those calls via Act 62 by Senator Mizell. The Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline began taking calls January 1st. So
And
between
of that, it was 121,
123 reported victims.
123 what?
Victims
Victims. Okay.
via those 91 calls.
Okay. In any particular area, is there any hot spot?
So I didn't bring that information with me, but I can turn that around to you so you can see where those calls are coming from.
Okay, because, perception is reality. And so when people start to say that, this is happening a lot in New Orleans or in Baton Rouge, we kind of want to know where those numbers are coming
Absolutely.
from,
Yes.
right?
And I will get those for you, share them with the committee. If I can't get them now, maybe we can get a report sent, and I'll be able to answer that for you. I do think that we have to kind of open up our eyes, because it is everywhere, even if there are hot spots, right? We need to make sure that we're opening up our eyes to recognizing this is everywhere.
And you mentioned the domestic violence component of it. Are you all just meeting with the juvenile judges or juvenile and district judges? How is that working?
So the Juvenile Judges Association is made of different various types of judges, because every jurisdiction has their juvenile cases in different types of courtrooms. So it's not limited to any type of judge. And it's an open call that they themselves have created an organization that all the judges can attend. So we spend time working with them sort of as the conduit, if you will. These are the judges that have stepped forward to say, this is important to me. We're going to talk to not just DCFS, but also LDH, DOE, Department of Corrections.
Right, and the reason I ask is, last session, I filed a bill to create the domestic violence courts in Baton Rouge. I think, and I heard you talk about when there are victims of domestic violence, a lot of times there are children involved. So
Yes.
how do we connect that, even when it's not a juvenile court case, I guess, is what I'm saying? Because the reason I created the legislation was because I thought we needed to focus in one spot so that the DAs and the judges and all of the support staff would be in one spot. It would be easier, all the cases would come through there. And so, having said that, a lot of them have children who are in the middle of all of that. So I just want to make sure that we're connecting not only to just the juvenile judges, but also the domestic violence courts. Well, I don't think there's any other one that's created, but I created the one in, I think there may be one in New Orleans, so that we can kind of capture all of that. Because when the household is affected by domestic violence, it certainly trickles down to the children.
Yes, ma'am. And so the trauma associated with a change in household and witnessing the violence is very important, and would allow those children to be more susceptible to come to our attention in a negative way. So we agree with you that the ability to provide services and supports wherever they are, so that they don't have to come into yet another system to create another trauma for the child or children, is very important. I think that's why we spend our time going to even the trainings where the Supreme Court is providing trainings for all judges. I think it is important, various jurisdictions, they do the work of pulling services together and crossing over without a specific law to do so. And then sometimes there's a law that creates a thing, and yet, whoever's sitting on the bench still doesn't do that,
Right.
And so it is important for us to continue working with everybody so that we can sort of raise that tide. I think one of the things that we want to do is, I'll make sure that we are connected, for example, with that court. The work that we've been doing recently to make sure that we're working with law enforcement, because, what happens in that court is coming through law enforcement, right? Like, that's how it gets there most of the time. And so we've been around the state over the last few months working with all law enforcement providers in every region of the state and state police to create that more collaborative environment, so that when we see something, we can do it together. I do believe also that the My Community Cares work is going to allow for all the courts to be able to find other resources and community partners that can help those children without them coming to our attention. And I think that's really important, right? Because it's another thing to be tagged as a foster child after already having another another trauma. So we want that to
And
happen.
I think I heard my chairman say, perhaps y'all should be asking for additional dollars for the domestic violence
We
program.
hereby ask for additional dollars for the domestic violence program.
I think I heard him say that. So you
Yes.
might want to follow along. He asked you
Yes.
about 2-3 times.
Yes, ma'am. And though, again, this is another one of those places.
I'm gonna wrap up because
Yeah.
he's looking over his
Oh,
shoulder
he's
at me.
looking at you.
And-
Okay.
And so,
I've been looking.
I know, but I've been ignoring you. And so, having said that, I'll move on to the snaps, and I'll be very quick. So for 3 years, people have been getting additional benefits, a minimum of $90-some per household. But perhaps, depending on how many children you have, a lot more if you have more kids. Is that the formula?
So really, the formula for the emergency allotments had to do with the fact that the federal government allowed each household to get the maximum amount for the household. So for the lady that we talked about, Miss Mary, she's a one-person household, the maximum was $285 or whatever. Her regular amount is $20, so that's why she was getting $285, because the maximum for one person is $285. However, if someone is already at their max, like they were receiving the max for their household in their regular allotment, that's the household that got another $95. So that's why it's different for every,
For
starts
different-
off with what was already in
circumstance. I got it.
already in the guidelines. Yes, ma'am.
And I want to thank you for providing us with the snapshot of all of our districts and everybody who is receiving snaps in all of our districts, right? And
Yes.
And so we're going to see people, because of inflation, right? Who really gonna need food more than ever before, especially when these benefits fall off. Would you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
And so, having said that, I'll move to the low pay in Louisiana as being a problem, because is that any reason why you can't, the retention is like it is in your department overall? Is it because of the pay?
Yes, ma'am. Some of our research would tell us that it does have to do with pay, and then also just, we had gotten a lot of information where people were feeling unhappy in the department, right? Not connected. So we've been working on most of those things and really partnering.
But pay it's something that could attract people.
Well, what we're seeing where we have sort of mandatory increases, though temporary, in child welfare, is that we're now able to hire people at this higher rate. And now we're working with the civil service and the civil service board to determine, like, should that higher rate that we're currently using be the regular rate. We started off with a child welfare caseworker before we raised the rates, basically coming in at,
35, 36,
and now they're coming in at,
low 40s, 42, something like that.
right. So the change of about $7,000 or $8,000 a year made a difference for people, attracting people in that
Okay.
hard-to-fill area.
All right, thank you very much.
Representative Marcel, may I just answer your question? The highest occurrence of trafficking occurs in Orleans, Rapides, and Tangipahoa parishes.
Orleans
Rapides and Tangipahoa.
and Tangipahoa.
Yes.
Thank you. I had heard that it was Orleans, but I wasn't sure if that was accurate or not. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Are you sure you're done, Representative Marshall? I just want to make sure. All right, appreciate you. Let's see, Representative Bacala.
Thank you. I do promise to be short. I want to synopsize just a minute. Y'all can correct me when I'm wrong. In 2018 or 2019, y'all issued an RFP. The RFP for this computer project called for a completion date or substantial completion with 18 months. In June of 2019, you entered into a 3-year contract. Somewhere soon thereafter, you figured out that it was maybe not going right, but you kept working on it. In June of last year, the 2019 contract had met its 3-year deadline. So in June, you came to us and asked for $10.2 million to extend the contract for an additional period of time in order to finish the work that was supposed to have been completed within a 3-year period. Is that accurate?
So that timeline is correct.
Okay, well, I'm gonna just continue, if you don't mind. So the issue is, there's multiple issues here. One is, even though you knew there was problems, and I think everybody was scratching their head and didn't know if this company was gonna be able to do the work or not. That's kind of what I'm being told. It was very, very problematic early on. 2 years in, you already had strong suspicions that the company would not be able to deliver the program. It was already beyond the 18-month call for the RFP. And despite that, you asked for another $10.2 million at the end of the 3-year period to extend a contract for a company that was not performing up to spec, had not delivered what they had promised. And you come to us and ask for another $10.2 million. I'll let you comment in a minute, but I want to get this off my chest. The other problem with this is, and I'm tell me one time, just one time where we had a major computer project that wasn't 3 years with a 2-year extension. Because we know that to avoid the oversight of this committee, you're going to always enter into 3s with the expectation that you're going to add 2. Tell me one time when y'all don't use that loophole to avoid the oversight of this committee and you just go out on your own and issue these contracts. I'll leave it at that. Mr. Chairman, turn me off and let them answer.
You're turned on. I don't know if I need to turn you off. So was that a rhetorical question, or you were asking for a response? Do you have an example of where that has happened?
On that contract term, so we have done longer contracts for Department of Education. We did a 12-year contract for LEAP, where that applies. The standard expectation, this is us working with Office of State Procurement, is that the 3-year term is the standard contract term, with up to 2 years of extensions. So we're operating within our, like the guidance from state procurement on how contracts should go.
Matthew, I get
If there are
it. I
other
think
options.
Representative Bacala gets it too, but I think he was just asking for an example where you've met that 3-year timeline when you didn't have to ask for the 2-year extension. Do you have an example of that?
So I can find some. I don't have some
Okay.
in front of me, but there have been times where contracts have been shorter or are completed within that 3-year time. And I know I've spoken to JLCB a few times about this, but that 3-year term is somewhat of a restriction or constriction of us being able to get these projects done. These are very complex projects, and I think a 5-year term is more appropriate. But our guidance has been we do the 3-year contracts as per OSP rule. If there are opportunities for us to do it differently, I think that would be wonderful for us because, like I said, these are. I'm sorry.
I get it, Matthew, but understand that in developing these programs and these projects, if the assumption and the understanding is that it's going to take at least 3 years with a 2-year extension going into it, what is the incentive to complete it within that timeline, not having to go into it? So we don't need to answer it. If you could find some examples, that'd be great. On the $10 million in June, have y'all expended all of that?
We, as far as I'm aware, we haven't spent any of that. So the original, and I have to go back and verify the specific amounts because the original contract was for about $13 million, and I think that's where we landed. And so when we came for that $10 million, because of the issues that we had identified, and these kinds of contracts, there's always going to be issues that arise. And so what we tried to do with that $10 million is I think we talked about this at JLCB, is specifically hold that amount until the system was delivered. So there was specific requirements in that amendment about holding the expectation that nothing was going to be paid for until that was delivered as it relates to those specific deliverables on that list. The ones we modify for that amendment because of those issues. At the time, when we came here to JLCB, those issues were not something that appeared to be something we couldn't recover from. We had assurances from the vendor they were going to get things done. That's when we did our independent analysis with the help of P&N, which the Secretary mentioned was doing QA/QC for this project, to do this analysis of where we were. And at that point, we determined that it wasn't viable and ended it. But we tried to address those concerns as part of that amendment process when we brought it.
So again, is the 10 million spent or not any of the 10 million spent? None of
I'd
it.
have to get the exact amount, perhaps.
So we don't know if we've.
One second. So perhaps 62,000 of that $10 million.
Okay. Okay. So members, there's still some lights up, just want to make sure we address the contract issue. Are there any other members whose lights are lit who have a contract question? You do? Representative Dubuisson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Matthew, I know it's difficult to just keep laboring this, but my question is, so CETA came up with their costs for the contract based on certain criteria. So it's baffling me how we can't then come up with what wasn't, put a cost on what wasn't delivered. Can you speak to that?
So there were defined deliverables in addition to just the system for these kinds of projects. So for this one, there were one of the things with the CEWA system is we have a lot of partners that we trade with, so courts or the federal government or things of that nature that we have to send data back and forth. So one of the deliverables was a catalog of that information and what we send for what purpose and that kind of thing. There were several others, I think approximately 10 or 11 deliverables there. Separately, there was the system itself, which is the thing in question here. And there were milestones along the way of things that could be done. So some of that is specific configuration of that system. Some of it is customization. And the Secretary mentioned all throughout this process, there were additional requirements being introduced at the federal level for us to adapt to that weren't initially contemplated in the original RFP or original contract. So we need to account for all those things as well. So that's kind of where this split has been from. And so for the things that they did deliver, we were required to pay them for that work completed, which is what that $13 million is for. But the system itself, the thing that would be useful for the caseworkers, that is what was not delivered.
And that's hard to put an amount on. Okay. Also, you mentioned that the federal government had as much invested in the system as we did. So are we saying that they put up 40 million as well, or?
It's 20 million state general fund, 20 million federal fund, total 40. So it's $20 million each.
20 million. So we were not on the hook for $40 million out of state general fund.
That's correct. 20 million state general fund, 20 million federal fund.
Okay. Also, so were we informed, did I just miss that in JLCB when the contract was going to be canceled?
When we came to JLCB, we didn't plan on canceling the contract at that time. So we initially came to JLCB in April of last year for our initial meeting, and I think our follow-up was in June. We were not in the position to be canceling the contract at that time. During that and post JLCB is when we did this assessment and better understanding, because also during that time, the legislative auditor prepared a report, which we collaborated with them on, that was presented here. And so, like I said, we were not prepared to cancel the contract in June of last year. Okay. Information gathered after that time up until October is what led us to the cancellation.
So if something happens after or in between our meetings, we don't have to be notified specifically for approval or whatever of the contract being canceled?
I'm not aware of anything that requires
Okay,
that.
I'm just asking a question. Okay, so separate from that then, the $3 million that was in interagency transfers, the decrease to Workforce Commission for JAG, that's my pet project. So.
Yes, ma'am. So just to be very clear, the fact that it was $3 million less in TANF dollars from our budget, but they will have replacement of state general fund dollars in their budget. So we are not seeing a decrease in the project, in the program total. Okay. It's just the means of financing is different.
Okay. And last question. So as far as the turnover, what would you specifically say has been done to improve morale and retain and get more workers for your department?
Ma'am, I think there have been multiple pieces that have assisted with us increasing happiness, if you will, at the department. One of it is increasing pay, addressing, the nature of the work that they're doing by increasing pay. We've done new training. Having more people working where there once was vacancies means that instead of having 3 people carry the weight, 5 people are carrying the weight. That means a big deal. In other changes that we've made, for example, in Baton Rouge, we have a contract where now there's a contractor taking calls overnight. This also allows for those employees to go home at night without having to work overnight, except for, more difficult circumstances, but on a regular basis. So our assistant secretary has continued to work both assistant secretaries, many different things. But we also started training for staff, understanding what is belonging at the department. We've opened up multiple avenues for people to have a way to express their ideas and concerns. We are working with civil service to do everything that we can to become an employer of choice. So I think the 13 hiring fairs that we had, when they saw hundreds reaching to 1,000, I think, total people coming to say that they want to work at the department, also helped them to, be less traumatized by all of the news, saying how bad the department is, or et cetera, right? And many of you have said very nice things to people about the hard work that they do, and all those things matter to where people feel proud to do the work that they do. So what I have found in a spirit of belonging and creating a space where people feel like they can learn and grow, they can develop as a professional, and that they see around us we're not only developing greater measures of accountability, but also greater measures of support. We have an employee assistance program that we've never had before right now in several parishes, and in short order that will be statewide. And so the other thing is that we're asking more questions. We're using different tools such as stay interviews to really understand where people are so they can give input and feedback into what's going on. So I would say we're managing better. I would say that we're trying to say thank you a lot more. And I personally, along with the rest of the executive staff, are really making ourselves even more available to just be reached, to let us know when something's going on. So I think all those things together are important. We cannot I cannot short sell having enough people to take on the cases, though. And I think, someone asked me recently, what is the thing that kind of keeps you up at night? And the thing that keeps me up has to do with the staff telling me, you're asking me to do too much. You're asking us to do too much. That as the cases rises, people have too much work on their plates. And so that's why, we're continuing to talk about the rising in caseloads so that we can together really address what is the right sizing of that caseload. You all might remember I was the undersecretary under Governor Blanco. At that time, there were 500 more child welfare workers than there are today. And so the caseloads are very different today. The way we do our work is a little bit different. But the fact that we need more humans to do the work where it appears that our communities are not okay, and I would continue to say this, right? The children will not be okay until their parents are okay. They do not live outside of their households and communities. And so us taking a look at and really being aware of what's going on throughout the communities, which is why it's so important to keep an eye on food security, right? And all the other things that we've been talking about today, like domestic violence and all. So really good conversation. I really appreciate your questions.
Well, Secretary, I'm very impressed with that answer, and I thank you for that. And I would say that your staff and your employees probably thank you for that.
So thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
They are great. The employees are great.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative Dubuisson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any other contract-related questions? Representative Thompson?
Just a few more questions. I'm like everybody on this committee. I'm really upset over it. I can't believe that we waited this long and not know more about it. I'd like for this committee to hear your group's final answer to all of our questions. Many of them have been asked a couple of times, but I'm confused a little bit about, do you think that, just yes or no, do you think we can get our money back, or most of it, or half of it, because they didn't live up to their bargain based on what you've heard today?
I'm not a lawyer, but I think the
Right.
answer is no.
Just,
My belief is the answer is no.
and division was involved in this also.
Yes.
I think the chairman, everybody's made very good points. And really, if we don't solve this, I'm not going to have much confidence in what you're moving forward with. It's just maybe work or maybe not work, but $45 million, a lot of money. And you say that we'll get some back. Some of it's federal dollars. But I think we ought to have the Inspector General and anyone else, the division. I'd like to hear what Jay Darden has to say about all this. But it's critical that you write it up so we know exactly what took place, like Representative Bacala and Edmund. Great questions about it. You've got to answer those so we know exactly what we're obligated for. And one time I think it looks like the whole 45, and then again, it looks like maybe half of it. And those half may be the government's money, federal money. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that as a
As a motion, a request? Okay, yes, we can.
if it's agreeable to you.
Yes, sir.
But we must get to the bottom of this. This is too much, and then if we pay it, we don't have a product to fill in. And you've made some very good comments about, you have one of the most important areas of government, and we need to take care of those that can't take care of themselves. But we can't waste or throw our money away. And this is throwing away money if we don't fight it. I think we ought to take it up and challenge them, the company. That's my request.
Okay, thank you, Representative Thompson. I think they said they'll provide within a week a report.
Right, is that the same request as
I think
Representative
it's
Evans or
kind of, sort of,
similar?
but I think he's asking for a little bit from the administration too, and if need be, we do have follow-up day, and on follow-up day, we can bring them back to address this as well. That's April 17th. Hang on.
All of the questions, put those down and answer those completely. We need to know from day one to where we are right today. And who was involved, who's looked at it, who agrees that we need to settle this lawsuit or it's not a lawsuit at this time, but it looks like it's going to go in that direction.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Okay, I think that's, no more questions on the contract? Okay, Matthew, thank you. Appreciate your answering the questions. And I also see Mr. Howells in the back as well. I hope you all appreciate the frustration and the concern that we have over this issue.
Yes, sir.
Okay, a couple more questions, Secretary. Let's see, Representative Romero for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Ms. Ricks, for being here this morning. So you talked about the Grow Good program, which has hopefully been very successful. But I was just wondering, can you kind of give us an idea of the percentage of people that are using that, that have SNAP benefits? And, is it as successful as it could be?
No, it can be way more successful if we have way more vendors also. And so I think in the slideshow that we gave you, you can see exactly where the vendors are right now. We would love to see that grow even more. And in addition to that, we've also looking for, see here on slide, I think they're not numbered, but very few little red dots right on there. So we would like your help in actually making sure that those who farm in your area are applying for the program. So you can be a great advocate for us and for those who are both farming and eating, using SNAP benefits to be able to be a part of the match program.
Right, and we've put that matching out in my district, certainly, because it's an agricultural-related district.
Exactly,
And I think
yes.
it's being utilized. I just wonder if, how we could, besides having more vendors, how do we get families that are using SNAP benefits to quit buying Cocoa Puffs and go buy strawberries from Ponchatoula?
Thank you for that. So there's a couple ways that we communicate with those that are neighbors who use SNAP. One of it is direct communication, but the other thing is that part of the SNAP program includes education, right? And so we do have our agricultural schools that are part of that, as well as some other smaller vendors that work with them to educate people on making choices. It is more expensive sometimes to get fresher foods. Sometimes fresher foods are not available to some people. So we're trying to collect and connect that, doing some work with partners, helping us to understand the different data points regarding food insecurity, and also working with the ag centers at Southern University and LSU to invite people to understand a little bit differently how they can choose food, right? Maybe they're not used to having eggplant, right? And so how can we introduce people to things that grow near? This program, I believe, was not only started but also funded by this legislature. I understand that this is another space where other good work could even be expanded more if there's more there. I think with the level of food insecurity that we're looking at in the state right now, it's very interesting. We're at the lowest unemployment rate. We're also at one of the highest rates of people using SNAP. So there is something there. People are working and they're still in need. The ALICE population, that those who are working that are still hurting, is growing, it seems, in Louisiana. I have asked the Blanco Center for Public Policy at ULL to provide some insights to us, looking at the data that connects those two. But suffice it to say that connecting people to fresh food is going to be a really good thing for Louisiana's health overall in the different ways that you've identified, the agricultural space, the better food for people, but then also stretching the SNAP. So do you have some more ideas for us, Representative Romero?
I think you're going to hear some, so I mean.
Very
they're
good.
coming up. You led right into one of my questions,
Okay.
because I have a hard time understanding how the administration touts the lowest unemployment rate in the state ever, but our SNAP benefits are going up. How is that even possible? So,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you for that question. And I think it's important to understand that SNAP is a supplemental program. It's actually meant for people who are working that are not able to make, to keep food on their table, notwithstanding them working. So you might recall that there is a requirement that you're working to get SNAP, which is why SNAP, you have to cross over the threshold to be eligible, but then the amount that you're eligible for slides depending on how much is coming in your household, right? And so people are working and they're not making enough money to take care of their family. So when our eligibility workers, and that was my first job, was working as an eligibility worker back in 19-something, you're looking at not just what they make, but also what they're spending. So as housing increases and the cost of your energy bill increases, that offsets what you have coming in on your income and could allow you to be eligible. So it's important that we're looking at people holistically, what's going on in your household. So the things that's happening in Louisiana with a decrease in the number of people, number of housing units available, the increase in expenditures, those things work. So SNAP is meant to supplement, not to be the entire food bill for someone. But that is why we're looking at it. Now, I did get some feedback from Dr. Barnes. He did mention several things that could be added to this, but it's a little bit over my pay grade, I would say, right now. I am a lawyer, I am in a PhD program, but I'm not an economist. Eric is.
You want to take that?
But it's important for us to realize that if people, here's where my expertise is, working with people directly. So in my own time working with those who are living in the ravages of poverty, people are working 2 jobs and they're still not able to make their bills. That's where SNAP comes in.
Okay, and so, since I'm the economist, I might take that part of it. Part of the connection between the rate of participation of the SNAP clients and the household and unemployment is a bit problematic now because you have people who are dropping out of the labor force. As people drop out of the labor force, they're not counted in unemployment number. So your unemployment number is not really comparable to what it was, say, pre-COVID. So if we're looking at people out of work, maybe that would be a better way to look at it. But if we look just narrowly defined as unemployment rate, it's going down in large part because of participation rate, labor participation rate. So when that goes down, unemployment goes down, then you're like, well, how is this SNAP going up? Well, these people may be out of the labor force. They're out of income, they're out of work. That makes them SNAP eligible. I don't need to go any deeper.
No, yeah, because he did say, and I got this, he said, researchers at the San Francisco Federal Reserve believe the low unemployment rate is driven primarily by a lack of new entrants into unemployment, right? It's like, who's asking for unemployment benefits? Strong economy means firms are less likely to fire employees. There's a large gap between open positions and unemployed, which means current employees are able to bounce around employers, avoiding unemployment. Fewer working age individuals are deciding to enter the labor market. Now, this is where I say, this is not what I do completely, but we work with partners to help us provide insights into where people are in need of certain things. And so we would love to work with you, Representative Romero, to understand it greater so that we can make sure that we're turning on things that make sense for people. What we know is that in Louisiana, nearly 1 million of us are getting food on our plates with assistance of SNAP. Like Miss Mary that I talked about earlier, she's getting $20 a month. It may not be a lot, but I bet $20 that she didn't have someplace else would be able to help her to stretch some things out a little bit. So SNAP is a great program, and of all the programs that we are known for, it's the one that people actually welcome. And one of the things that we have a very tight rein on, fraud related to SNAP. We have a really great fraud department. We don't really see that greatly. We see a lot of people being very grateful to have a benefit. And this is one of those ones that's direct, right? You can only use it in a grocery store, a federal program. So we see the benefits, and people really come back to us and show a lot of gratitude for the program. We're grateful to be able to provide it to Louisianians, but we would certainly want to pick up all the ideas that you have in this space.
Thank you. So how often does a eligible participant have to reapply or provide information to y'all to continue to get SNAP?
Yes, sir. And it'll depend a little bit on if you're talking about someone elderly or not. But generally, the general program, most people, they're eligible. They'll do something to help us ensure their eligibility at about 6 months, and then again annually.
Okay, and then, so I know in my area, the children that are going to school are being fed 2 meals a day and sometimes 3. do y'all take into account that those children are already being fed, or it's a federal program and it just, if you qualify, you get it?
Actually, because families qualify for a SNAP, will make them eligible for the food programs at school. So it's meant to really work together with those programs. So it's not like we're taking some away from you because, children are being fed. Maybe it's because they're like my children. They eat and they just keep eating and they just keep eating.
That's children.
But the programs do kind of work together, all coming through U.S. Department of Ag and Food Nutrition Services. Different programs, but they usually kind of work together. The pandemic EBT programs were a little bit different. They kind of looked like a SNAP program, but they were coming through education. We were having, to arm wrestle a little bit to try to get enough data to kind of push those out. What I'm seeing right now is that there's not a lot of households that are seemingly being over-resourced in the food area. And I think it does also have to do with Louisiana being urban and rural, people with so many transportation issues. And so being able to, give food for children, of course, this is where education would really want that, right? Because maybe there's not enough to go around. Miss Mary would say, I really needed that 245. Now I'm going back to 20. But at least when they're trying to learn, they're being fed, even if there's not enough when I go home. And so it's really important for us to continue to work with people on summer programs for that same reason. So it's a very good point. And I haven't found any indicators from our partners that help us with data to show that families are over-resourced in food. But again, we're open to understanding insights from you all as well.
Okay, and my last question, it's going to shift gears. So if you have an incident where the outcome was bad, all right, but is the investigator that's looking into the case, are they reviewed at some point in time? Is that case reviewed and, try to figure out what happened and what went wrong?
Absolutely. Representative Romero, so your question is about child protection investigations. And so since I've taken this seat, I've instituted a different and newer review for me for a case. We're always looking at the system. The system changes the policy and the practice, including what happened with the employees. We have a lot of new employees. We're going to have to continue to take a look at, how they're performing, where else they need to be plussed up on their training, but also they have a supervisor and a manager, right? And so it's important for me to understand, is the system, did the system work the way that it was supposed to? And did decision-making work the way that it should? And where is the problem that needs to be addressed? If we have a bad actor, I know how to handle a bad actor. If we have a situation where our system did not support well enough for a different decision to be made, then we will address what needs to be fixed. If it is a person that needs to be fixed, if you will, because they made a really bad decision, one that would not have been supported anyway, I know how to handle that issue, and a person will be addressed appropriately. I think this is, one thing that I feel comfortable being able to address both systems and people. As a former general counsel, as an appointing authority, as a former HR director, those are the things that I can do pretty well, especially working with the amazing staff that we do have. If we find a bad actor, we will deal with the bad actor. If we find that the system is not supporting properly, we need to change the system. We're doing some work also with one of the universities to assist us in making sure that we have a more specific critical incident review of those things that happen. And it's important for you guys to know that there are other reviews that happen even if there's not a big thing, right, that happened and it goes into the news. But like what happened when there's a child death review that goes off and it's a multi-department review. We recently would see something come back where it looked like we don't know why a child died. Maybe it was SIDS. You remember that? We would talk about that, sudden infant death syndrome. I talked about that the other day. They call it SUDS now. It's like, okay. But now, where maybe 10 years ago we would say, looks like SUDS, now they're really looking at, was there a substance involved that maybe nobody knew? We're seeing now more cases where maybe the police saw an incident like that but didn't bring it to our attention immediately. Now, after the Child Death Review Panel, it's coming back to us to do a review. So I appreciate the question. This is one of the things that I specifically changed when I took the office so that I could have specific and immediate review when there is an issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Romero. Representative Freeman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Ricks, for all of the detailed information. Most of my colleagues asked the questions on the technology side, but I have some specific questions. In fact, one of them was about SNAP. I'm glad that Representative Romero asked about the program with the
Grow the
farmers.
Good?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because Market Umbrella's
Yes.
main office is right next to my district office. So I don't know how well it's working in Orleans. Do you have any specific?
So I don't have it in front of me. We do have we do have, do we have one in New Orleans?
Yes.
You definitely do.
Yes, 3
Yeah,
locations.
3 locations.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Crescent
Market
City
Umbrella runs 3
Farmers
markets.
Market.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And so I'll have to get more information for you about how many of our neighbors they're seeing and how much money is going through those
I'd be curious
systems.
because I sometimes see people attending that market and, just wandering through the traffic. And I haven't
Yeah.
even asked them because
Oh, yeah,
I
we can
actually,
get that
there's one that I
information.
go to near my house sometimes.
Okay.
So I haven't even asked them, the people who run it, but I
Yeah.
would be curious to see.
Let us
There
get
And there are
that.
3 different locations throughout the city, so it would be nice to know
Mm-hmm.
how it's working and where maybe some of the gaps might be.
Very good.
For the farmers who, and I think they've done a pretty good job in Orleans of making people aware, but I'd love to know if the end user is getting,
Yes.
the people who have the SNAP benefits are getting that information.
Right. Well, so, and then we have the ability, and I think this is where I really love our communications department. We've kind of bent over backwards trying to make sure that we can pinpoint people to provide information to it. So in our research that we'll turn back over to you, if we find an opportunity to send direct text messages to the people that live in those zip codes or those areas to send them the information, we will plus that up. We've been doing that already, making sure that they know about Grow the Good. You can find it on our website. And those types of things, but we certainly can work with a vendor to increase the awareness in the particular areas.
Okay. Well, and the other question I had about SNAP has to deal with the SNAP for college students that you all have a flyer about, and I just wondered how that was going and what kind of report you might have for how the investment there is actually
Yeah.
getting distributed. I know we
Well-
have a growing number of college students who
We
need
do.
SNAP right now, which
We
is
do.
really worrisome, but it's the fact.
It's a good thing in one sense that more people are going to college who hadn't, like first-gen college students, right? And so they might have less support than those who have been, generational college students. So that part is the good part. The fact that more people need food supports generally is, what is troubling for us. The other thing that I think if you take a look at that flyer, you'll see that it's actually showing you that some of the changes will be coming to the student because some of that also is related to COVID, right? And so some changes are upcoming to that eligibility. I would have to get back to you a real report about that. But the fact that 1 in 3 students are facing food insecurity is important for us to know, right? So we're working with and through Board of Regents on eligibility. Part of what we came up with on the 211 CEA was working with Board of Regents and other organizations through the governor's subcabinet on workforce and education. It came very clear that access to benefits was important to student success, as well as access to other supports. So we started working with, through 211, there's a platform called Unite Us. Unite Us allows us, anybody using it, to send a referral to someone else, and it's going to be a closed loop referral where we can actually see, did the student actually receive the benefits that they needed? In a pilot program, we set aside $25,000 of NGA, National Governors Association dollars, for example, in Lafayette, gave it to the United Way there. So students at ULL and the local, is it Southeastern? the local LCTCS school there, were provided information that, like, let's just say your transportation, you had a flat, now you can't come to school, now it's going to cause you to be an incompleter, which is not what we want. There would be a way that they could get assistance. There's some things happening on the colleges, but sometimes it's bigger than that. So through that program, we have some insights into what type of support students need. It's not just food, right? It's other pantry items, and it's sometimes these one-time supports that will bridge them to get to become a completer.
Yeah, and I'm appreciative of what you're doing in that area, because I think there's not a lot of awareness that we have these college students who are struggling in that space. So
Yes,
thank you.
ma'am.
Thank you for that. My other question, I think Representative Marcel and our chairman covered, as far as domestic violence goes, and the funding needs for what's available, and what's your plan for, fully funding at the best level we can. I think in the budget right now, we have 7.5 million.
Yep.
And there's hope to increase that, because we know that we do have a problem across the state with domestic violence, and
Yes, ma'am.
wanting to make sure that those facilities have resources, and because that's affecting children, families.
It absolutely is. And I'll have to say that I'm going to step forward and say that Louisiana doesn't have a head of all domestic services, right? Domestic violence services, all the money and all the resources are coming through one place. The fact that we have several in our budget, and the fact that some federal dollars come through our budget, they're really very much a pass-through. Right, and so I do think that, I appreciated the legislative auditor's report was looking at it from the statewide perspective. Where can Louisiana be better? We certainly want to be a part of that. We can certainly pass through more dollars. We can do more on the policy side. I'll have to say that that's not been one of our flagship programs.
Yeah, and I have the Louisiana auditor's report in front of me, so I know
Yes.
that only 10% of our domestic violence funding comes from state sources. So
Right.
I'm going to encourage your agency, and with help of some of us on this committee, to try to figure out where we can find some state resources for that, because it's nice to have the federal dollars, but it's a massive state problem.
Yes.
That we need to address in our budget. And that's an opinion, not a question, but I hope we can work together.
We
on
can
that.
definitely work together, and we certainly would be a willing partner to receive those funds and get them to the providers and sit with those. And of course, we do participate in multiple spaces, but I am reminded that there is no real one head.
And then on the human trafficking piece, I know Representative came to us and said Orleans, Tangipahoa, and Rapides, and I knew that Orleans was the top, because I've done a lot of work in this space inside of the city. And some of that has to do with the pass-through of people coming through with us being a port city and a travel-to city. So it's not always an Orleans resident. It's sometimes somebody who ended up in one of our emergency rooms. I noticed that the funding for that is located in our budget as advocacy for victims of human trafficking at 5.6 million. What does that specifically mean, and how are those funds used directly for the victims? Because the word advocacy struck me as, I don't think we're running like a campaign to tell people where to report. I know we probably are at some levels, but I want to make sure it's getting to that end person who's been trafficked. And I know we might have the first in the nation program that deals with the emergency response. I think Eden House just opened a spot where, because what happens in the emergency rooms in New Orleans is someone's being trafficked, they get brought to the back to nurse and doctors dealing with them, the trafficker's sitting in the back,
Right.
in the waiting room, and they have figured out a way to put them in an emergency shelter
Right.
and try to get them help, which is amazing, because I believe it might be the first in the nation, which not everybody here probably knows about. But I want to make sure those advocacy dollars are making it to the people who need to be in recovery and where they need to go.
Yeah, so this, under the Act, DCFS is making care coordination and advocacy services available to the victims. So we're working with the governor's office, and then the child advocacy centers, right? So advocacy services are making sure that a person who is being trafficked doesn't necessarily get booked as a perpetrator, but a victim, so that it crosses a span of providing services and advocacy in that space. And so it's very important also to make you guys know that there is a a meeting that happens monthly where all those individuals and organizations that are working toward this end come together and are looking at that together. So that's a great space to talk more and get more information. We can pass along to you those things that we have from there. But advocacy services it's both care coordination and advocacy.
Thank you very much for everything you're doing on behalf of the kids and the families of this state, because in spite of the problems with the OTS, which are a problem, you are doing really hard work, and I appreciate every single staff member who's out there working with some of the most tragic and traumatic situations that they see on a daily basis. So I appreciate what your staff does do.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Freeman. Representative Villio for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Riggs, we know the link between children abuse and the likelihood that they may go on to commit crimes themselves. You would agree, correct?
I believe,
The high percentage.
I think that's true. I don't have a data point in front of me. Yes, ma'am.
Sure, I'm not asking for the data point. But you're familiar with the Justice Reform Initiative, are you not?
Generally, justice
Sure.
reform in the state, yes, ma'am.
Sure, and we know that there are monies being saved by the release of certain inmates, and this is not an endorsement by me of that. But my question to you is, are you aware of any conversations that have taken place relative to investing some of those dollars saved towards abused children that DCFS sees in an effort to keep them from going on to a life of crime?
So let me tell you what I am aware of. Department of Corrections is a very good partner with us. So, for example, in our 211 cooperative endeavor agreement and the use of the Unite Us platform, all of those persons who are working with those who are coming out of prison are using the platform to provide services to those families. An increase also in the number of services provided to children whose parents are incarcerated, allowing for more supports in the community so that they don't come into our care. So what I am seeing is the work that they're doing both on the juvenile side and the correction side is going towards stabilizing families so that those children do not come into our care. Not necessarily about stopping them from becoming someone who does bad things, but stabilizing their household so they can learn better, so that they can do better, and therefore, they wouldn't do bad, right? So I've seen the work that they're doing is stabilizing the households of those who are getting out, but it's not coming directly to DCFS for those who are in foster care.
Do we have any data that you're aware of that would then take it further and show that those efforts have caused a decrease in the number of those at-risk children from going on to commit crime? Do we have any of that?
I don't have that. And I think that maybe corrections may, or juvenile services may.
Okay. I'll talk to them about it, because I've been, and I was once the criminal justice director in Jefferson Parish, way back when, overseeing all of criminal justice, both adult and juvenile. And way back then, I was continually saying, for me, typically all bets are off once an individual commits a crime. But it strikes me odd still to this day that we're not doing a better job. We can identify those high-risk children that are likely to commit crime, either because one or both parents are in jail or because they have siblings in jail.
Yeah.
And I do think a greater effort needs to be made to put services to those children that we identify so that they don't go on to commit crime and end up in jail themselves.
Representative Villio, thank you for that. I think this is, some of the very drivers are what you're talking about, like these ACEs, right? These adverse consequences to children that would cause them to have, be disturbed, and if they don't get the proper treatment and proper supports, hurt people. That's, some of the things that we say when we're talking about trauma. That being said, My Community Cares is built on that. We're using data to determine where to go into the communities. If we don't go and help with collaborating alongside the rest of the community organizations in that area, the likelihood of them coming to our attention is very high. So I think that it's very, very same thing that you're saying.
So the
I
My
just don't know
Community
how to-
Cares gets some funding from the JRI investment.
So the My Community Cares basically brings all the community providers to the table.
Okay.
Those community providers may be getting resources from that, but I don't know where they're getting all their resources for.
And how long has My Community Cares been operating?
So we had 2 years in a pilot, and now we're just going statewide. And what we bring to the table is resources, little, but the fact that these are the community providers in that community, serving that community, they could be funded by all sorts of different funding sources, not just funding from DCFS.
Do we
don't
have
that
any
much.
data from My Community Cares that might assist me in evaluating that?
Yes, ma'am, we can turn that back around to you for sure. We'll get you
Great.
some data about My Community Cares. I have a few anecdotal things here, but let me get you back
That
the
would be
data.
great, thank you. And shifting gears, one last topic, fentanyl. And I have a bill that I brought this session targeted at increased penalties for the manufacturers and distributors of fentanyl, either based upon weight or based upon number of convictions, and co-authoring a bill relative to the clandestine labs that are manufacturing the fentanyl. And that's what I wanted to talk about in particular as it relates to your field workers, are those kitchen labs. And I don't know if you're familiar with the kitchen labs where they're pressing fake pills that contain fentanyl, and that's resulting in a large number of deaths in our state. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Are your workers trained? Because as I understand, it's not any specialized equipment or large spaces, et cetera. It's sometimes just a blender, a little smoothie blender or whatever. And the residue alone from that kitchen lab can kill a child in that house. Are your field workers trained to at least have some understanding and be able to observe whether they see any of that going on in the homes?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
However, I would say that, there's more training to be had. And unfortunately, we're seeing that these things change, they morph, and they grow. Like what you used to be able to look at as paraphernalia or, a kitchen is changing, like you said, something like a blender. This is where we have to have our law enforcement partners be a part of these matters, and we work really closely with them. It's also why we really want to hold on to our workers so that they can become more seasoned. And it's also why we're doing more work to get people that have an expertise in this area to work alongside workers, because our workers cannot know all the different things that they will come against or is coming against children in the area. So yes, we have a base training. We need a much more deeper, and so we're continually training.
Well, certainly, if you think there's anything I can do along those lines of creating those partnerships with law enforcement, I'd like to be a part of that.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing those bills.
Thank you. And thank you for your work.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative Vilio. And members, we do have LDH as well. I've tried, if we can go to maybe noon, keep in mind that DCFS will be coming back on follow-up day to address a couple questions that were raised today, so we'll get another
Lovely.
bite as well.
Lovely,
So-
Chairman. Absolutely.
Okay, Representative Bacala for a question.
Thank you, and I'll try to be very brief in my questions if y'all will be brief in your answers. How's that? I want to correct some of the record that we had earlier testimony about SNAP is for working people. That's not exactly correct in that I think by the general federal regulation is for single individuals, single parents, it's expected that 50% will be workforce participation, which could include seeking employment or training. For two-parent households, it's a 90% expectation. So 90% of a two-family household is expected to have one person employed for at least 35 hours. So my question is, what is our workforce participation rate, which is, I think what the federal government calls it, for single households and two-parent households?
Well, so you said a short question, you said? I was waiting for it. I'm sorry.
Well,
Representative
I'm doing my
Bacala,
best to be short.
I accept your statements as far as those things that we're talking. So generally, yes, we're definitely talking about workforce. I would welcome the staff to tell me what the workforce participation rate is if they brought it with them. If they didn't, I will definitely turn around and give you the information.
Okay, but it just kind of follow up.
Okay, I don't have it right now, they're
All
telling me.
right. But suffice to say that SNAP goes beyond just helping working people.
It does.
All right, I
It
think
does
that-
more than that, for sure.
And I think the statewide, we talked about unemployment being at its lowest point. Workforce participation is another number which doesn't measure, it measures how many people are actually, and 58% of the people in Louisiana who are work eligible are in that 18 to 64 age group, I believe, are actually participating in the workforce, which is about 6% below the national average, I believe. So those numbers play in. The other thing I would like to bring up, and I'll try to do this quickly because I know we're on time, is the more we look into these programs, the more we realize that we are contributing to poverty by making it difficult for people to make the leap. And a good example of that is recently, the federal government gave a pretty good increase to Social Security recipients. As a result of that 8.9%, some lost more value and benefits in the SNAP program than they gained in income, which is a good example of, and if you don't mind, maybe someone can come up here who's involved in that process just a little bit, because I think this is a very important component, that we are keeping people in poverty by not allowing them to make the leaps out of poverty financially. So is there someone here who can give just a brief statement or answer a brief question about
What do you want to talk about? The amount of benefits that people were getting,
no,
the change?
I want to talk
or-
about benefits cliff.
I'm right here.
Okay, benefits cliff. Would you agree? I'll give an example. Some people, let's just say that they receive $10,000 in benefits, and it's income indexed, okay? And if I make $1 too much, I lose $10,000 in benefits. Therefore, I am stuck. It is not, and can never be a good financial decision to make more money if I'm going to lose more in benefits than I gain in my employment. Such that if I'm making $20,000 and receiving $10,000 in benefits, I can't make $21,000 without losing $9,000 in value. Correct? That's a general summation.
That's correct.
What can we do at the state level? And I know that with SNAP and TANF, the rules are pretty broad. What can we do at the state level to give a softer landing such that somebody who makes $1 too much, because we have a lot of flexibility in those programs, but we kind of do an all or nothing in Louisiana. We don't put limits on how long you can earn benefits without working. I know in the past we talked about the fact that, you know, one of the things that happens in workforce participation rate that we calculate is that if you're seeking employment, that counts as though you're working. But then we hear on the backside, people call DCFS and to report people who refuse to take a job offer, but nothing happens. So, and look, I'm gonna go back again. If it is the goal of our legislature to take poverty seriously and to try to eliminate it from this state, then we have to address the programs, the benefits cliffs that make it impossible to get out of poverty. Would you agree?
I would agree.
And I think one day we need to have real serious conversations about what, I know most of this is gonna be federal. But we have to have real serious conversations internally with you guys and with other agencies to talk about how much flexibility you have to eliminate that barrier to prosperity.
Representative Bacala, I agree with like 99% of everything that you said. So let's talk about this. The most important thing that I agree with is that we need to continue the conversation, and there are things that the state can do. And so I invite all of you to a meeting that we are having with the Atlanta Fed to talk about the benefits cliff on the 28th. You all will get an invitation. It'll be a Zoom, so hopefully you can take it wherever you are, and it's a Friday, so that hopefully you'll be off. This is one way that we can look at data and understand not only what a family goes through when they're making those decisions like you illustrated, but also what can policymakers like you and maybe me do when on our side on policy, on your side on law, to be able to bridge that divide when someone would normally cliff from a federal benefit. The state can step in. For example, there is a way to provide food benefits a little longer using TANF when someone no longer has SNAP eligibility. This is something that is working in the state of Washington. DCFS would need more of its TANF dollars in DCFS's budget in order to do that program. There's data in the CLIF tool, which is a tool that is created, and now we call it Catapult in Louisiana, by the Atlanta Fed using actual STAR jobs in Louisiana and other jobs and training resources. It allows for a person considering different job opportunities to determine which one would be better for them in the long run based on their interests and what is going on in our society in Louisiana for the jobs and their needs. So what I would say is, yes, the benefits are not helping, the benefits cliff is not helping people out. What I would also say is that using data provided by the tool and other data, there are definitely programs that the state can enact to allow for a bridge for someone to continue on a path to employment training that will lead them to a job that will allow them to take care of their families. We can do something in Louisiana, and I would love to be able to partner with you to bring a program as such.
Listen, you used one term, you said we're not doing enough to help people out. I would say that we're doing just the opposite. We're ensuring that people can never get out of poverty by the manner in which we administer programs which are supposed to help people get out, are supposed to help. And it's, to me, look, I hate to categorize this beyond just the facts, but it is sinful that we are doing what we're doing to people and not letting them prosper. But that's what's happening, and I've heard the number that certain households might get as much as $45,000 in government assistance benefits when you add everything together. That means if I'm unemployed and I'm getting $45,000, I got to find a job for $50,000 just to break even, considering taxes and such things. And we wonder why poverty is a problem, and we've almost made it impossible to leave.
Well, we can work on it together. And Representative Bacala, Dr. Horan illustrated earlier that DCFS workers make much less than that. And so it is something that we have to work on in making sure that workers who are working really hard are actually getting enough money for all the hard work that they're doing. And so there's not one lever, but these federal programs, they have SNAP is not as flexible as we think. When you're off of SNAP, you're off of SNAP. But Miss Mary is grateful for that 20, but she really would like more. But those are federal rules. It's a TANF block grant that actually allows us to do a little bit more. Maybe CSBG, which is not something that we administer. But I do think that there is more that the state can do, and we want to keep working with you, Representative Bacala and others. So we hope that you guys will come to our meeting on the 28th and allow us to continue these conversations to create the bridge.
I would like to circle back to the original question. I would like to know how many people are actually participating in the workforce and how close we are to meeting the expectations set forth by the federal government regarding the 50% total of single parent households and 90% two-parent household. I think that's the
We will
federal
get that to you.
expectation. I think there's also some expectation that this should be a 24-month program that you
Which
expect.
that SNAP should?
Well, SNAP, TANF, one of them, I think.
Oh, they're very different. TANF is 24 months.
Okay, so we'll talk
Yeah.
about that later on. That's enough.
Absolutely.
It's 3 minutes to noon. Bye.
Always room to talk to you, Representative
All right, thank
Bacala.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. Representative Edmonds, Representative Bacala left you 3 minutes.
I want to thank you guys for your work on, with me on adoption. And I know that you had mentioned that foster care, obviously the numbers are way too high. We got to do something about that. But I am encouraged to hear last year we had the foresight after the Supreme Court decision to make some policy and some funding available to try to help our women in the state. And I understand that that program it takes some time to get it launched, but I understand it's going well to get it there.
That's correct. And so right now, I think, the ball is in a court, right? And so I identified this morning that the Human Coalition, we're working with them on getting contract to come in first to help us really set that up. So year 2 is going to be great. But I think we'll see that contract even coming through even while we're in session right here, so that as we move into the last part of 2023, we're going to see a rapid uptick in that since we've gotten those base steps down.
And I guess my question is I think it's a great program. I think you
Yep.
guys are doing good to get it launched. I'm very appreciative. But the funding part of moving forward, I just direction of what you guys think with funding, because I think we're going to be very pleasantly surprised and pleased of what's going to happen over the next few years with this program. But I do need some funding guidance so we can try to help you, because you can't do it without funding.
Yeah, that's right, Representative Edmonds. And so I don't know do you have something, Eric, specific to this so far?
No, we know how to fund it up to fiscal year 25.
Okay.
Then we can have conversation.
I'd love to have
about
that
what-
conversation,
Yeah.
because I want to move that forward. I think the legislative process was very sensitive to try to help you do that. So I'm very pleased with that. So
Thank you.
if you'll let me know, we'll work on that with you.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you
right?
for.
Thank you for your good work.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Chairman. I'm at a made 3 minutes.
Right on time.
I want to be
less than
commended
2,
that I'm
yes.
better than my seatmate,
And I
Representative
I
Bacala.
applaud you on that. Thank you, sir. And with that, that'll be the end of the questions for today. We'll follow up on the follow-up day on the follow-up stuff we need to follow up on.
Thank you, Chairman. Zarang.
Thank you, y'all. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.